Welcome. Welcome. Most of you I've spent the last few days with in Doha and here, and it's always a pleasure to be with my colleagues from IKT. So welcome to my house. This is NYU Abu Dhabi. Anyone who doesn't know me, I'm Maya Allison. I'm the executive director of the art galleries at NYU Abu Dhabi and the chief curator for the university. And a quick note about today. I've attempted an almost impossible schedule of speakers, so we're going to go very quick. View this as a series of questions. But before we begin, I want to thank NYU Abu Dhabi and the Vice Provost for the Arts, Awam Amka, who is going to welcome you properly.
Good morning and welcome to NYU Abu Dhabi. I know you all come from different geographical points and so on, but we're so thrilled to welcome you to a place of convergence, which is what we do at NYU Abu Dhabi and in NYU in general. As a university from the city of New York, we always believed we exist in spaces of convergence and so on. And so I want to thank my colleagues who made this possible. They make it so seamless, but I know they were working around the clock to make this possible. And to welcome each and every one of you to our university. If you have a time, it's not a very large space you can walk through, but particularly if you want to wander into where you find some of our art students and what they do, you should do so. And my colleague, Bill, so I'm somewhere, and others will be happy to walk you through the art center as well. You're in a place that was a utopian space. Utopian, and that utopianism is of course threatened daily by global events. But the utopia we had as a university was to actually explore the idea of a global liberal arts education. A liberal arts that's not about the divides between the East and West, between the North and the South, between first, second, or third worlds, but really a liberal arts that creates a nexus for knowledge making and for people who make knowledge in various parts of the world. So NYU Abu Dhabi is on a grander scale what we started in New York, and we're in 12 countries. And NYU Abu Dhabi is this place where we get students from over 150 countries. We get faculty from a large number of countries in from different geographical locations. And our idea is to really create relationships between modes of producing knowledge and culture from different corners of the world. And we're so proud that it's been 15 years that noble idea has actually kept us going. And indeed, the various global challenges, et cetera, refine and sharpen our focus on our utopia rather than put us in states of despair. So for those of us who are cultural curators who actually examine artifacts that are produced from varieties of cultures, et cetera, these challenges are also some of the things that we have to deal with when we share knowledge with our audiences, with our spectators, et cetera. So we're really, really so proud that you're here. We hope the exchanges will be really something that we hope you even encounter some of our students, et cetera. But welcome to this amazing place, this amazing utopia, and we want you to be part of that utopia. Because, of course, as you know, most corners of the world are in a dystopian space. And we feel that we got to transcend that in the way we produce knowledge and culture. And so for us, it's not about restating what we know from our different cultural locations, but really it's about examining the places of connection and exchange. And that's what we hope this conference will actually reveal. So thank you so much for coming, and look forward to your presentations. All right.
Okay, thank you so much. I should also mention, in addition to being my boss, the Vice Provost of the Arts, he is also Dean of Arts and Humanities at NYU Abu Dhabi, and has a significant biography, which I will not go into now. My role in this is to invite my colleagues who work in the field alongside me in the UAE. And my hope today is that together we are thinking and speaking to each other and in the company of IKT with you about the question of our field, the future of our field, plural, and the existence and value of our fields. So what I'll do is with each section, there's a total, and if you have the guide that was online, there's a PDF with the outline of the schedule. I have a few to hand around if you need, but what I'll do is I'll be the human guide and I will sort of introduce each section as we go. To begin with, the opening keynote speech is by Her Excellency Manal Attaya, who is the museum's advisor to the Sharjah Museums Authority. And when you see Sharjah on Monday, you'll understand how important that role is. And her bio is listed in the interest of how ambitious my schedule is. I won't be reading bios, but we'll be handing them out as we go. She's going to speak about, from her perspective, about the museum boom and the microecologies of our region. And that will be followed by a Q&A with Professor Terry Geis, who is herself a curator and art historian, who was instrumental in another conference related to the questions we're asking today in collaboration with Guggenheim Abu Dhabi during the Dakar Art Summit. So I'm going to jump ahead because I think we've now managed to go back in time about 5 minutes, so we're doing well. And please join me in welcoming Her Excellency Manal Attaya.
Right. Good morning. Assalamu alaikum, everyone. Just to let you know, Maya, I'm also making my remarks a little shorter, so hopefully we'll stick to your time. It's really a pleasure to be here today. And for those of you visiting the UAE for the first time, welcome. So Maya, Allison gave me a difficult task of providing an overview of the development of cultural infrastructure, which I'm using that term to refer to museums, foundations, cultural centers, anything that you can imagine that houses some form of culture or arts. So I'll use that in museums and a little bit of other terms interchangeably, but I'm here to give this sort of overview of the infrastructure in the UAE over the last 3 decades. And I hope in the time together we have, I'll walk you through some of the key milestones, share a few reflections, and then offer thoughts on where we've been, where we are now, and where we may be headed. Our journey into the arts and cultural landscape of the UAE begins with the unification, but the heart of the story lies in the remarkable growth we've witnessed in the past 30 years. Particularly in the development of museums and cultural institutions. This growth has taken many forms, from iconic architectural landmarks and world-class museums to increasingly dynamic public programming and education initiatives. And while the buildings are striking, what's just as important, and perhaps I would say even more so, are the ideas that they house, the programs that they offer, and the communities that they hope to serve. So today's audiences, we must remember, are much more diverse, and they are more curious, they're more critical, and they expect more, and I think rightly so, because institutions, cultural institutions, should evolve alongside that. I'm not alone in knowing, I think in this room, that too often discussions about the UAE's cultural scene, and especially the Gulf, focus on infrastructure alone, mainly the buildings, the star architects, and sometimes the big name collaborations. These are certainly have their place and they contribute to global visibility, but I believe the more urgent and meaningful questions are, why has the UAE invested in culture in this way? What are they seeking to achieve through this growth? And how are we ensuring that this development serves our communities while cultivating global relevance? So to begin by answering these questions, we have to sort of look back. I think it's very important, and look back before that international spotlight and before the more known global headlines. I'm just going to go back here. So it's worth remembering that before the unification of the UAE in 1971, there was a clear desire to preserve and present our history. The UAE's first official museum that you see here is the Ain Palace Museum, which was opened in 1969, a full 2 years before the formation of the nation. And that alone speaks volumes about the early commitment to cultural preservation. But what often is less discussed, however, is that there was and is a quieter and personal side of this story. During the 1970s and the 80s, the UAE would rapidly, develop and modernize, and so individuals and families across the Emirates were actively collecting, sometimes deliberately and sometimes instinctively. These collections, whether they were textiles, jewelry, books, old radios, photographs, were often kept as heirlooms or objects of memory and nostalgia. And that was a direct result of the rapid changes that people were seeing. These objects or collections were held in private homes or sometimes in farms. We have farms here in the UAE. And so often there is a home, and there's often an annex sometimes that's created, which would often house some of these items. So in some cases, they're now what we describe private museums. They were rarely recognized as such at the time. And today, you'd be surprised to know the UAE alone has over 100 of these private museums, which I had the fun task of starting to record them all when they wanted to be licensed and be considered museums for the public, which are not necessarily in some cases. So there was some learning curve there working with private individuals. But alongside these physical and tangible collections, there's also this whole entire layer of our cultural heritage that is intangible. That is oral traditions, that's stories, poetry, music, and the skills that were passed down through generations. These are harder to collect, per se, in the traditional museum sense, but they are no less vital, if not essential, to understanding the cultural heritage of the UAE. For seafaring coastal communities, for example, those involved in pearl diving, and trade, oral history was essential to daily life. As some of these practices faded with time, so did many of the oral traditions, unless they were actively preserved or revived through government-led initiatives, such as heritage festivals that include storytelling, performance, and live craft making, or were saved in museums or by personal or institutional archival efforts. So when we speak of cultural development in the UAE, we must consider both the visible and the invisible, the museums and the exhibitions, yes, but also the memories and the individual custodians of heritage and their intangible practices that continue to shape our sense of self and identity. So as we move through this journey this morning, I hope we can just reflect a little bit not only what has been built, but why, but also the values that underpin their development, and what are the stories that we are choosing to tell, and for whom. So I'm going to begin with I'm going to mention a few important dates. I don't want to quote statistics, and that's intentional, because too much of the focus in conversation in the sector is on superlatives, the biggest, the most expensive, the most iconic, blah, blah, blah. And I really don't believe that's why people like myself, cultural practitioners, that's not what we want to be remembered for. We want to be remembered for building something, of value. We want to be remembered for being responsive to our communities, for creating these spaces that contribute to social cohesion, education, and more so now in my area of research and well-being. So a little bit of context. I mentioned already the UAE was founded in 1971, and you have this museum in 1969 under the leadership of the late Sheikh Zayed bin Sultan Nahyan, the father of the nation. And the focus in a lot of the material in this museum was on archaeology and ethnography. Then following the unification, you have early museum initiatives emerging in Dubai and Sharjah, but it wasn't really until the 1990s that we saw significant momentum, particularly in Sharjah, under the vision and the leadership of His Highness Sheikh Dr. Sultan Mohammed Al Qasimi, who is the ruler of Sharjah. So institutions such as the Children's Discovery Center, the Sharjah Science Museum, and the Sharjah Archaeology Museum would open in the mid-90s. The Sharjah Art Museum, which you see here, opened in 1997 and is still one of the region's most important and vital institutions dedicated to Arab and international modern contemporary art. By the late 1990s and early 2000s, you start to see the momentum accelerate even further. I was appointed in 2006, and in 2 years after I was appointed in 2008, I opened 4 museums in 1 year, for example. So still alive to tell the tale. So, you know, there was a lot happening and a lot of pressure to open or reopen bigger museums that would house now bigger collections. So one of them was moving the small maritime museum into a larger new purpose-built museum for maritime history. The other was moving the small collection of Islamic material into a larger building, which now had much more of a collection, which became the Museum of Islamic Civilization. And then we also opened multiple heritage-related museums that were restored under His Highness's leadership. And then, of course, we don't forget the Sharjah Biennial, which in 2003 was restructured and later became the Sharjah Art Foundation, fell under the Sharjah Art Foundation in 2009. And here's just a nice image of some of the work that was done in Sharjah. Oop, I'm playing around with this, sorry. Yes, when you go to Sharjah tomorrow, you'll see the integration of a lot of these beautiful contemporary spaces within the old heritage or old city of Sharjah. A lot of the museums or cultural institutions in Sharjah are kind of more human scale, so to speak, and are also just by the nature of when they were developed, but also sometimes intentionally are purposely put in neighborhoods and areas where you have pedestrians walking through, and they're not at all positioned in places that you kind of have to think about going to. If you live around the city, and you can see right behind here, all those residential buildings, and office buildings, people walk through these areas all the time. So in 2006, as I mentioned, we were established as a museums authority, and meanwhile, this is happening. You have Abu Dhabi unveiling an ambitious Saadiyat Cultural District plans for the Louvre Abu Dhabi, for the Guggenheim, the Zayed National Museum, and one of the major milestones then you find later as we move now into the 2000s is the opening of the Louvre in 2017, which becomes a huge milestone for cultural diplomacy. In Dubai, on the other hand, they developed a different kind of cultural ecosystem. Museums, yes, but also more centered on creative industries and independent sort of platforms and commercial platforms. Christie's opened in 2005, for example, which is pretty early. Art Dubai follows as the art fair in 2007, and then you get Alserkal Avenue somewhere around 2009 and 2010. And then you see many years later, Christie's is opening and Sotheby's in 2017. So there is a progression in what's happening there. So these developments weren't isolated. They were and still are part of what we're calling microecologies, interdependent ecosystems of public, private, non-profit, and grassroots initiatives, each with a distinct role. Some focused on heritage, others on contemporary practice, some were government-led, others community-driven, but over time they have begun to intersect, collaborate, and co-produce in some really exciting ways. So what has fueled sort of this museum boom? There's a lot of different driving forces. The first obvious one for that is a growing awareness of the culture's role in education. So as the country developed rapidly and developed strongly in the education area or sector, museums became essential tools for informal learning and were particularly incorporated into curricula over time. The second is a national effort, of course, to preserve tangible and intangible heritage, so restoring a lot of the historic homes, the forts, et cetera, and trying to bring back life to these museums, whether that's Beit Nabuda we have in Sharjah, a large pearl merchant's home, or Qasr Hassan here in Abu Dhabi. It was clear that with this very rapid change in the environment, that there was a need to preserve a lot of these very important historical monuments, so to speak. And so many of them were converted into museums. The third, of course, is there's a force now to look at community engagement. The population is growing. More and more people are coming to the UAE and making the UAE their home. So these museums started to evolve into more social spaces, hosting more programs, whether talks or screenings, et cetera, and offering alternatives to commercial leisure activities. And around this early 2000, it's important to mention with community engagement, even though a lot of it happened here in the UAE soil, a lot of it also starts to take place across the seas, so to speak. We have, for example, at this point, the UAE National Pavilion debuting in the Venice Biennial in the late 2009, 2010. And that starts a new phase of sort of international presence as well, and community engagement with an international community as well. There's also a beginning to understand, or an understanding starts to also arise that encourages innovation and creative economy. So knowing that museums can support inspiring artists and designers and entrepreneurs, so they're seen now more increasingly as part of a broader innovation ecosystem, especially when paired with universities or creative hubs and other sort of digital platforms. And we've seen a lot of collaborations with innovation and technology centers and parks. We have a innovation park in Sharjah, and so there's been this really interesting interplay between technology, innovation, and museum collections and how they can inspire that. The other, of course, is the more obvious one. You know, it's a tool of soft power. Culture is a means to articulate this identity, to shape international perceptions, and to foster cross-cultural dialogue, and that happens through biennials, exhibitions, and overall cultural diplomacy with the different things that we participate in, including Expo 2020 is another good example. And finally, of course, you're looking at the importance of economic diversification. So museums and cultural districts will now play, and do play, a key role in tourism, urban development, and creative entrepreneurship. So culture now becomes a driver of innovation and a pillar of national strategy to expand our sources of GDP beyond oil and gas. So the museum boom in the UAE then is not really just a building sort of spree, although it seems that way. It really is, for many Emirates, a deliberate and strategic response to civic ambition. Globally, museums today serve multiple roles. They anchor communities, they shape urban identity, they stimulate economic growth, and they support lifelong learning. And so the UAE has really embraced this model as best as it can, while tailoring to its own context as it matures, investing in both infrastructure and in meaning. In parallel, I think it's very important, we have to mention this, there's the growth of higher education programs in museum studies, arts, curatorial practice. So universities like NYU Abu Dhabi, the American University of Sharjah, the Sorbonne in Abu Dhabi, the Zayed University, they all play really key roles in looking at how we can invest in our young people and help them with being more involved in the curation, the research, the documentation of not only just, as I said, the cultural heritage of the UAE, but also its connections to the wider world and its global presence. So this sort of new institutional support is really critical. So Then we have a few years ago, I'm just going to shift to where we suddenly find ourselves in a bit of a pickle. You have the pandemic, okay, the pickle of the pandemic, and it really disrupted global tourism and forced numerous institutions across the world to completely close, and some were able to pivot, online. Where possible, most importantly, I think what it did, which was helpful, it forced museums to look inward and toward a sort of hyper-local audience emphasis. So although tourism is still recovering in many of these countries, it has not yet returned to the pre-pandemic levels, making local engagement an ongoing priority for many of these museums. So these shifts have sort of occurred alongside a broader cultural reckoning in the museum sector, also the rise of cultural nationalism, a long overdue post-colonial critique, and a kind of retreat from globalization has all spurred a renewed emphasis on local and national identity. And as a result, new museum developments are increasingly reflecting indigenous, regional, vernacular traditions, moving away from the universal placelessness to designs that are much more rooted in cultural specificity and local meaning. And this particularly reminds me of a time early on in my job when my boss, the ruler of charge, said to me, I don't want to build museums that if someone's in the museum, this museum could be anywhere. It could be in Hong Kong, it could be in London and France, and you wouldn't know the difference. He said it has to be a Sharjah science museum, it has to be a Sharjah calligraphy museum, it has to be a Sharjah science museum, which meant that we had to look at ways to really ensure that there was a personalized, bespoke design, but also in the subject matter that we talk about that would really change or make it unique in what it was offering, that would make it very different than other museums around the world. So the UAE sector is evolving in dialogue with these sort of global themes, and we are rethinking sort of narratives and collections and expanding the way we exchange. So this shifting paradigm, sort of in a nutshell, is looking at sort of object-centered to people-centered museums, and that's sort of happening around the world in many places. Many museums around, in Sharjah, but also beyond, are really looking past the traditional model of display to sort of embrace also interdisciplinary approaches. And the shift really particularly resonates in the Middle East, where our museums are increasingly becoming these spaces to reflect on the region's complex histories, its diverse populations, and of course, its aspirations for the future. I can go into a little bit about what we do and how we have become people-centered through our portfolio of education and outreach, accessibility programs, et cetera, but we can maybe talk about that later. But I think it's important to note that part of this has also been a very important focus on building local capacity. This is what the educational institutions help with. They allow us to really build a new generation of young people who have the curatorial conservation skills, for example, so that they are able to we want to encourage more critical thinking around museology and representation, and we can only do that if we have that skill set. So back to museums in the UAE, we're creating these great platforms for professional development, internships, fellowships, and many museums, whether the Louvre or here the Zayed National Museum, which will be opening soon this year, they've invested in developing Emirati curatorial talent through structured training programs and international collaborations, and this is an investment to shape the future of new museum leaders, which I'm very proud to see. As someone who started back in 2006 with the only museums degree in the country, that is a huge shift 20 years later. To have all these great people graduating in this field. So finally, I just wanted to say, my closing, that our challenge remains always to remain relevant. That means that reimagining our programs embracing new technology, continuing to identify and reach underserved audiences, and being brave enough to question how we operate and evaluate our impact and adapt and innovate accordingly is part of what we need to be doing and are doing. Every institution in the UAE is at a different point in this journey, but we are all learning. Collectively, we are shaping a powerful and rich tapestry of cultural production and innovation. Our infrastructure, though, again, I want to stress, is not just ornamental, as it may seem in the grand architectural approaches of some of these museums, but this infrastructure can be iconic, however you define that, but still be strategic, thoughtful, and purposeful by how it prioritizes and supports education, fostering dialogue, building national pride, social cohesion, as I mentioned earlier, and building cultural bridges between communities and countries. So I am acutely aware that there's a lot going on, especially in the US, with the threat to institutions, with current policies, or dismantling a lot of the good work, amazing work people are doing in cultural institutions. So I know it's a difficult time, and we feel this even here, and support those who are trying to fight against this, and we share your struggles. You know, we have museums, cultural institutions have a crucial role in creating what sociologists refer to as sort of bonding and bridging social capital, and so offering these shared cultural experiences and programs are really critical. So I hope, in a more positive note, as we look ahead, that we remember the true legacy of our work. We will not be measured, by the scale of our buildings, but in the conversations that we stimulate, the awe and the joy that we bring in the lives that we hope to touch, and in the value that we will create together for generations to come. Thank you.
Now? Yeah? Thank you so much, Your Excellency.
Thank you.
It's a great way to start the day, and hello, everyone. It's really nice to see you here and to be involved in this. And I just want to say, I think it's amazing that the group is going to be able to go to Sharjah. No trip to the UAE in this capacity is complete without a trip to Sharjah and the groundbreaking role that it's played within the cultural infrastructure here and worldwide is impossible to overstate. And I think everyone really appreciates this overview of where the country has been, a little bit about where it's going. One of the things, and I'm sure people have questions, and so I want to give the audience a chance to ask those. But one of the things I picked up on in your talk that I wanted to follow up on, you mentioned the idea of your research into well-being. Yeah. Could you talk a little bit more about that? I mean, I think that comes up naturally within the context of everything you're describing about social cohesion and museums, but just kind of picking up on Dean Awam's kind of evocation of these ideas of utopias. I feel like there might be some interesting elaborations that you could make on this.
Thank you. Well, in regards to well-being, that is a direct sort of response also to the fact that what museums are expected to do is ever-changing, and the expectations and the needs of the public are changing. So, 20 years ago, museums, or 30 years ago, museums would have been seen here and elsewhere as places where you go and you look at things and then you leave. And maybe if you're lucky, there's an activity or something you can do. That's completely changed. People are going there to do things, to be around people, to make noise, to get involved in all kinds of interesting things, whether they're sleeping over at the museum or having a singles night out. There's all kinds of stuff that happens in museums now that's very different than the way in which they were thought of before. And I see the same happening with libraries. Actually, libraries are changing a lot. They're becoming much more dynamic spaces, and I think that's wonderful too. But going back to the well-being part is, over a year ago, I was in the US for a certain period of time in a fellowship, and I really wanted to look at how arts and culture could be used more and their power harnessed more to help young people have a better positive outlook in life and feel overall better. And I had very lofty goals, of course, because I'm not type A personality. I was like, I'm going to, solve everyone's problems when they come in the museum. They're going to come in one way and they're going to leave like cured. But I was very happy to speak to some much smarter people than me to tell me that's probably not what's going to happen. And maybe you can just go down a couple notches and really just think about how can you make someone feel better, a little better than when they came in. And so that became still a very important and large goal, but one that was much more important and perhaps a little easier to tackle. Meaning that even in this example, this is, I don't know if the image shows up, but that's, the last image was Alserkal having a festival. These spaces, cultural and otherwise, have become places where people begin to feel better about themselves, about life, about maybe particular topics. I see that there's a huge potential to look at museums as a third space for people to take care of their mental health. We have a large stigma in this part of the world. Asia has it too, about getting therapy, seeing a psychiatrist or a therapist, etc. And it's also very expensive. So I thought to myself, if you're someone who is struggling, but you can't go to the medical professions or medical professional, what are your other options? And so it's trying to remind people that we have a toolkit that we can use, and that can be journaling, that can be listening to music, that can be exercise, that can be participating in culture. These things have throughout history been known to make people feel better, less stressed, less anxious, lift their mood, etc. And so that's a very important part of what I feel museums are doing more of and should do more of. It's not so much about the object and what did you learn and but how did that make you feel? How are you feeling today? How is there a way we can share our experiences together and uplift one another, because we need more of that. Yeah.
Absolutely. Yes. Thank you. I do want to ask if there are any specific questions that people might want to. I figured there would be. Yeah. Do we have a mic that?
Shall I go ahead? Is this working? It's working. Can you hear me?
Yes, I can.
Well, thank you very much for this symposium, and Your Excellency, thank you very much for the openness and for treading into the realities that you gave us about the cultural movement in the UAE. I have a very specific kind of question, if you don't mind, and I've written it down so that it's accurate. How are you approaching the long-term international task of building a truly sustainable and engaged audience with that huge numbers of museums being developed and established? One that is rooted in a deep cultural connection and relevance, rather than simply catering to transit audiences driven by cultural tourism trends. Okay. That's my question.
Great. Long question, but yes, I got it.
Very long. Thank you.
Thank you for the question. So sustainability in particular, that word, is a new word that's been added to the ICOM definition for museums as of, 2023. So prior to that, the definition of museum pretty much stayed the same for the last, 5 decades or so, about preserving, safeguarding, being a public, service, nonprofit, or et cetera. But what's changed is particular aspects. One of them is that the introduction of the word ethical, the introduction of the word participation, and one of them is sustainable. And everyone, as I said, we're approaching this differently, and I think you can look at sustainability in 2 ways. One is what you mentioned: how do you sustain a audience for the long term that will be meaningful and not just catering to a transient audience. And the other is, how do you look at sustainability in terms of actual sustainable practices, building potentially new museums or rethinking older ones so that they are more sustainable for the environment. So we are looking at that now, and I'm proud to say that I'm happy that this is something that's become a priority for us. So in some of the new projects that have been announced in Sharjah, for example, everything that we're looking at is going to be, just the sustainability side of the environment is looking at how to lower energy usage, obviously in costs, but also how to look at thinking about using better materials that make more sense for this environment, rethinking about introducing vernacular architecture, which Sharjah has done for a long time anyway, but really thinking about some of the new technologies that come with that, that can make those spaces last longer. The audiences that we want to last longer, especially, I would say, in Sharjah, have never been transient. Sharjah as an emirate, as you see, is not exactly a tourism hub. People come there for sure, a lot of tourists, but a specific type of tourists. Sharjah's tourist profile is family-friendly emirate. So the people who come there come as a family. They tend to be middle to lower spending in terms of what they want to do, and they are usually actually families that come from a demographic of around the Arab world. So their interests are usually in heritage, culture, some leisure activities, parks. They enjoy that kind of thing very much, and so we offer a lot of that in Sharjah. But going back to your point, I think for us, always the number one audience we were trying to reach has been children and families. That was always my directive, and my remit was focus on families and children. We need to get this new generation of children interested and excited about museums and wanting to learn and be there. We want families to start to choose museums as an alternative to going to a mall or watching a movie. Those are all great and fine, but how about them coming to a museum? But to do that, and this is the answer to the question, is you have to be consistent in what you're offering in terms of, the consistency of how much you're offering and the variety that you offer. So we continually look at making sure we offer every weekend, throughout the year, workshops, events, etc. We have festivals that happen throughout the year during the better weather months. And I know this sounds maybe so simple, but when I started working 20 years ago, we didn't have things in Arabic, if you can imagine. Most of the things that happened were not even in the Arabic language, or there was no Arabic and English alternative. If you had to go to one or the other. So just simply changing that and saying everything is going to be in either the primary language or both, that we're going to ensure that we also look at other groups that have other needs, and we're going to also take care of that, whether it's autism community, etc. We've been very conscious to really ensure that we have sustainable audiences because they want to keep coming back. There's something that they see new every time that they come. There's something that they feel familiar with, like they know what they're kind of going to get when they come. So there is that sort of level of comfort. This is a place we know, we always enjoy, we have this kind of fun doing this, and we don't feel like outsiders when we come. And where possible, again, we try to do the best we can to make sure that we are listening to what people want. And a lot of the time, they just want to have a good time. They want to be with other people. They want to enjoy that, and they want to do things, physically do things, make things. And so we learn from what we see works, what doesn't work, and then from talking to people, of course, and just seeing how they move in spaces and how they react to it. But we're very conscious of keeping those audiences there, and they've grown tremendously. And we have people, in a quick example, someone went to the museum when they were 8 years old, the archaeology museum, because it was by their house, they could walk to it, it's in a neighborhood. They went to college, they did their senior project on redesigning some aspect of the museum because they were a design major, and then they got married at 24, and then they brought their child to the museum, and at the same time, we're employed by us as a graphic designer. So some things take full circle, which is really exciting. So we know that, in a way, that's a sustainable kind of thing. People come, it becomes part of their lives, and somehow they come back into it, whether professionally or personally, and I think that's wonderful. Hope that answered the question.
Good morning. My name is Victoria. Thank you very much for this presentation. And I'm wondering, I have two questions actually. The first one is about the government support of the art industrial field in Emirates, because I was told that you have like different models of government support in each emirate. So how does it work? And the second question is how much religion actually impacts the art industry in Emirates nowadays? Thank you.
Thank you. Sorry, the second part, could you repeat that?
How much religion impacts, like influences the art field in the Emirates? Yeah.
Impacts the art field. Oh, the art field. Okay, sorry, thank you. So first question. Yes, every emirate has different approaches to how they will fund the arts, but generally, I would say overall, the government practices for funding the arts is pretty similar. It just depends on what they are funding and how much they are funding. The good news is that funding has increased by a lot. There's been huge, new announcements for $1 million dirham for certain grants or more, obviously, in different types of areas. Sharjah, for example, started their first, I think it's $100,000 grant for filmmaking. So they are institutions or foundations specifically giving grants for young artists to produce new works, etc. Research, Alserkal, which is not a museum, does have its own research and fellowship program, and they give money to people, artists and otherwise, to intellectuals to kind of research different aspects. So the range is huge from how you're getting funding. I mean, this example is patron fund. This is a family funded. Then you have a governmental-led funding initiative. Overall, the good news is that the UAE is investing a lot, and it comes in all different areas, from whether it's scholarships to go study particular things or to study here in the field. Sharjah, for example, gives full scholarships to people who want to study their masters in cultural preservation with a museums track or whatever, an archaeological track. So there's funding in the education, there's funding in cultural production, there's funding in, Dubai, for example, with the new visa, creative industries and creative entrepreneurs, allowing more people to come here on a visa to stay and hopefully be successful in their creative endeavors. So there are different types of aspects to it, but they're definitely growing, and that's really good, and they're growing in the areas that we didn't always see them grow before. And the second question is, I don't see religion playing a big part so much in arts in general. I mean, I would say that we have the country has obviously Islamic values, and so you will see that in potentially maybe some of the interests that some of the local audience has. Obviously, for example, maybe not so obvious, but the interest in Islamic exhibitions or in calligraphy exhibitions, these are quite high. We will have usually a larger number coming to things like that. But that's the same to say for people who are not necessarily Muslim but want to learn about that culture. So I think you'd be surprised, just really, I mean, every day, depending on where you live, though, there's so much of everything here, multi-faith and national and intersections of all different kinds. I think where we ever maybe considered it is back when we used to just be, some things might have cultural sensitivity, we'd call them, rather than religious sensitivity. And even then, we still have such a huge space to still work in. I mean, these are very small issues that come up, but for sure, I think a lot of maybe what you might see rooted in some of the exhibitions or programs, or even the architecture, has some Islamic connection, but it isn't necessarily a big part of that. It's part of it, but not the essential aspect. Any other last questions? Maybe we'll take one more. No? Oh. Is there anyone? Oh, okay. Oh yeah, we can easily.
Can you hear me? Yeah?
Yes. Oh, I'm sorry. Yes.
Yeah. So, quick question. Between local, you were talking about remaining local, and I find it very difficult with all this Western branding around, like, you know, the Guggenheim, Louvre, Christie's, whatever. So, how is this challenge to really remain local versus all these super, you know, predominant Western figures here?
Yeah. So, for the sake of time, the shorter answer to that is we don't need to have, you know, this sort of dichotomy of Western and branded and then non and it's local. I think the beautiful nature of the UAE is that it's everything. It's this beautiful amalgamation of all different kinds of people. To me, it's beautiful to walk into the park or down the beach, and I swear to God, in a 30-minute walk, I hear 20 different languages, different dialects. I see people dressed extremely differently than one another. I see different types of family units. I see different types of conversations, types of people, and the reasons they're here, whether on holiday or they live here. It's so amazingly diverse. It's a wonderful thing, I think. And everyone's like happy and getting along with each other or just keeping themselves to themselves. No one is feeling uncomfortable. Until you spend time here, you know, really live here and see the changes, you probably wouldn't notice it, but it's very visible, and I think it's a great thing. But in regards to that, I would just say that anything that seems branded or whatever is something that once here, there is very clear strategic plan to ensure that it is rooted and localized in terms of who's working there. Again, I mentioned looking at narratives and rethinking some of those narratives from the original, maybe Western paradigm. How can we do things differently? Originally, that was the one we followed because that was the most prevalent and the one that everyone was using. But now, as we've grown and we've matured, we know that we can do things a little differently or change things or alter things or modify things depending on our audiences and the skills that we have. So I don't think it's as big of a problem anymore. I think the inferiority complex that some people might have felt that they had, which unfortunately is a byproduct of colonial times, is something people are learning to overcome now and feel confident in what they're doing and feel good about what they're doing for their people without having to always be checking, is this what someone else would be doing? Is this what France does? Is this what the UK does? It's wonderful if that's what they do, and we can follow those models where appropriate, but we don't need to be worrying about how we reach that same standard. We are that standard. We're beyond any standard. I don't think there's an issue there any longer, thankfully. All right. So thank you, everyone. I appreciate you listening. Thank you.
Okay, if my next speakers would like to come to the stage. In this next section, we're now going into the super fast presentations, and everyone's going to see if they can keep time. But in particular, this section is called Behind the Scenes, and we look at the practice that goes into shaping the future of the fields that we work in. And foremost for me, having worked in the UAE and discovered how much history is here that is yet to be gathered and written. I cannot tell you how pressing the questions are in the question of the archive, which is our next section with Salwa Mikdadi and Bana Kattan. And then that will be followed by 3 curators, and we'll kind of go into that next, but we're going to begin with these 2. And thank you very much.
Thank you, everybody. It's a pleasure to be here today. Thank you to NYU Abu Dhabi for inviting me and Salwa to do this talk. My name is Bana Kattan, and I'm a curator and associate head of exhibitions at the Guggenheim Abu Dhabi. But I started my career as a researcher for Salwa Mikdadi. And this was after I had studied, no shade to the School of the Art Institute of Chicago, but I studied to become a curator. I took a lot of art history classes, and I realized that I had a very little knowledge of Arab art, and especially of the modernist period. And this is something that's very difficult to learn about. And so I was very fortunate to be able to work under Salwa as her researcher for 2.5 years. And this is a period of my life that I consider my second master's degree in the real art history that I wanted to learn. So I owe Salwa everything I know about the art history of our region. And I am more than happy to talk to her today about a specific archive that she's working on now called Al-Mawrid. And so I will begin by asking her to just tell us a little bit about this very important, almost life project for her.
Thank you.
Let's switch.
Yeah. But again, thank you. Thank you to Maya and to Dean Amka for organizing this symposium, and welcome to the UAE.
Closer to your mouth.
What is the center? The Al-Mawrid, which means in Arabic the source, is an Arab center for the study of art, is an archival and research center dedicated to interdisciplinary study of art of the Arab world. That means Arab countries, 22 Arab countries in this region and North Africa. Its activities include the fellowships, research, of course, ongoing publications, and a series of lectures and symposia. We operate under the Research Institute at NYU Abu Dhabi, and in collaboration with the Arts and Humanities Division. So that's in general.
So Salwa, I think we can all agree that archives are extremely important, but I'm wondering if you can tell us about how you selected the specific region, and then also the specific time period that Al-Mawrid thinks about.
We're particularly looking at a period from 1850 to 1994. That means to the dawn of the digital age. And within this period, there's been a great deal of scholarship and publications, with the majority, 85% of it, was published in the Arabic language, in French, Italian, and thirdly in English. So specifically, we are focusing on the Arab world, because in this modern period, the Pan-Arabism ruled in this region, and activities in Arab countries where the associations of Arab artist groups were very much linked. In discussions, and the discourse was amazing during that period. And this has not been made accessible to researchers, and that's what our journey began in late 2000 with a grant from the Research Institute and the government of Abu Dhabi, and we hope to continue this work,
Thank you. So you chose this really critical time and a really critical series of a part of the world that needed this archive. How are you now collecting?
Well, it's important to add that we try with this archive to redress the gap in archival scholarship and heritage management, where particularly now with the digital age, findability and accessibility is key to whose stories are being told and whose voices are not heard. This is very important in an age where we are getting more and more dependent on AI. So where is the material on the scholarship from this region if we continue to depend on AI? And this is the gap that the center is trying to, address with our work.
In terms of maybe some translation. So for example, if AI does have some of the materials, they're not ever in Arabic, the Arabic materials. Can you talk about some of the both oral histories that you are embedding into the archive, as well as some of the translation work that you're doing?
Yeah, we have been focusing on translating memoirs of artists, which we find most amazing. And we had published one, and there are more coming in this year, about 3 of them. Our work is slow. It takes time to create an archive based on the highest standards in scholarship and ensuring that the scholars can have easy access through the finding aids. Much of you, I'm sure, have used the archives. Currently, most of our students have access to literature review rather than depending on or using archives and having access to primary documents. And this is what we are trying to redress with the digitization of this material on location.
On location is a really interesting aspect. So one of the first things that Salwa told me about Al-Mawrid is that a key thing is that they're making sure not to remove these archival materials from their countries of origin. Do you want to talk about that?
Yeah, it is important to preserve the patrimony of these archives within their national boundaries, and we do not want to repeat a mistake done in previous century when much of the archaeology and all that has disappeared from this region. So we want to make sure that it remains in the respective countries. We only accept donations of archives if they are endangered or orphaned, clearly, and at the same time, our intention is to have a free, open access to these documents, so they are easily accessible to the extent we are allowed to do that with copyright laws. And therefore, we have trained researchers on location in different capitals, Arab capitals, where they work in the studio of the artists, where they digitize, sort. I mean, it's a long process. We counted about 49 steps from the point of assessment to the point where the material or the collection of documents are digitized and uploaded by our main library in New York, updated regularly and backed up. So that's a very important aspect, absolutely. Another is that we don't curate. So when we assess an archive, we make sure that we document every single scrap of paper, notes, notations, correspondence, all kinds. We collect everything and sort it except the artwork. We don't deal with the artwork. We don't take photographs of the artwork. Most of these artists now especially have passed away, and we're working with the custodians of these archives, so the children or grandchildren or grandnieces. We have artists who were born in like 1879 we're working with, and so forth. So it's a range.
I want to ask you maybe a bit of a personal question as my final which is that what do you wish for, what do you hope for this archive? This archive is somewhat of, you've done many things in your career, but a little bit feels like a legacy. So what are you hoping for this archive?
Well, the root of this project actually started in the 1980s when I was living in the United States in California. And having realized that there is hardly any focus or interest or information on art from this region, along with a number of colleagues, we established a resource center also in California on the Arab art. But that was predated the digital age, so we used the old-fashioned databases. But we did respond to many questions from many art institutions, maybe some of them are here today, to learn, advising or linking them with other artists and others. So that's where it started. And my wish, of course, is to continue this work. This is not a one-time project. This is a work that would require the support of many of the institutions who will benefit from it, art institutions, scholars, universities. As I said, it's an open access, and we hope we continue to receive the funding necessary to sustain it for a long time to come. Thank you.
Thank you, Salwa, for giving me the knowledge I needed to become a curator today, and for Al Mawrid giving it to everybody else.
Well, thank you. Thank you all.
Okay, Reem Fada is somewhere back here, if I'm not mistaken. No, wait, Munira. Is it Munira first? We're going to do the Q&A at the end. So what we'll do is we'll have each person speak. If you want, you guys can stay on the stage or come back up at the end. So Reem Fada, I'd like her, she will be speaking about her curating for Abu Dhabi, specifically her work at the Guggenheim Abu Dhabi, the Cultural Foundation, and the Public Art Abu Dhabi Biennial, which you're going to be seeing this afternoon. So join me in welcome to the stage for rapid fire. I do have one. It was in the Google Share Drive. Oh, it's in the. It's not here. Yeah, can we do that? I'll sit here. Okay. Mercury is no longer in retrograde, but it's sticking with me for a little while. If Munira would like to jump in while we get the document uploaded.
Hello, everyone. Thank you for having me. It's an honor to be here today. What I'll be talking about today is just kind of guiding questions. So I will be asking everybody more questions to think about and kind of looking at the questions that I consider within my practice. I was asked to think about the space of responsibility of representation and place, and that to me is something that generally does come up within my practice. I founded Dirwaza about 5 years ago, and Dirwaza is an Abu Dhabi-based creative space that considers narrative reclamation through exhibition-making practices. The lab questions inherited definitions and reflects on the contemporary art scene within the United Arab Emirates and the wider Arabian Gulf. So as we all know, the region is always spoken on behalf of. And so for me, through Dirwaza, I look to speak from the inside out, as opposed to having major spaces talking about the region. So these are questions that really guide our practice. What is the responsibility of contemporary art? What is the role of ethics in curatorial practice? What is the role of extension and accessibility, and how do we talk about that? The role of representation, and questioning and redefining inherited definitions. I appreciated an answer that Manal gave where, we have all of these structures that exist around the world that have been somehow inherited into the region. And so it's very important to be critical towards those and begin to ask the question, why? Does this actually fit? How does it fit? How can we make it ours? I think language and culture stems from the ground up, and this is something that Dirwaza does actively. So moving on from those questions, and I'll try to answer these questions quickly through various examples that Dirwaza has kind of built and done. The question of representation and language. I like to talk about language as soon as I talk about representation, because language is a big part of culture. It's a big part of representation. I remember at the age of 16 when me and my cousins started speaking English amongst one another. I got called up to my grandfather's room, and he sat me down, made me wait, and then sat me down and quickly asked me, he's like, Munira, when you dream, what language do you dream in? And that really hit home now, but when I was 16, I was very confused by the question. And I came to answer the question, and he asked me to leave the room without me answering the question. So from the age of 16, 20 years later, I'm still thinking about this question of the language that we dream in, because within this space, within the space of language, you have the space of culture. And when you have the space of culture, you have the space of, defining a region. The Gulf has been subject to like this kind of idea of newness, and I would like to counteract that idea, because everywhere stems from a history, and everything does stem from a history. So what happens when this space has been defined by others? What happens when this space has not been defined? When we talk about the Arab world, we talk a lot about North Africa, and we talk about Sham, the Levant. And now it's like the Gulf is kind of taking its scene and jumping into the space. So how do we understand a place beyond this geographical map? I believe that art and contemporary art really has a big role to play when it comes to this. Is there room for redefinition? Yes, I believe that there is plenty of room for redefinition when understanding the region. And the way that we can redefine is by creating, is by making, is by having these conversations and really bringing forth the space of narratives and correcting perceptions, which is eventually what exhibitions do. As part of our space within Dirwaza, we also look at the role of translation, because what we end up having is these inherited terms from the English world, and then we translate them quite literally, and there's no real cohesion in the translation. So how do we begin to make up these terms or definitions that exist? So at Dirwaza, we have a series called the Glossary Posts, and we just put up words that we think about. For example, a curator in Arabic has many different terms. Each term means different things. How do you take from the English language that is not as rich and wide as the Arabic language, and kind of simplify the term in Arabic to fit the English term when there is a push and pull there. So different kind of thoughts and ideas fall under our glossary post series, and that's to end up feeding sort of more thinking and more conversations about where we are. So I think there is this an obsession with defining place. We always hear people talk about the West, the East, the South, and it's always defined and almost like a non-negotiable. And so I always ask myself this: why is there this obsession? I think that you can begin to understand the obsession when you begin to really kind of thread through regions, through the space of the arts, through the space of culture. And from that, you have these set definitions that have their pulse in that space, as opposed to it being from the outside. A quote that I always like to present is a quote that's very, I think anybody that's here has heard plenty of times. Those who are not from here may not have heard it, but from the late Sheikh Zayed bin Sultan Al Nahyan: a nation without a past is a nation without a present or a future. I think that within itself really just stems everything that we're doing, everything that's being discussed from the speakers that were already speaking. Things stem this, like a ripple effect takes place when you have a history and you understand it and you understand your place within that history. Then only can you build up on it. Quickly kind of going through, so a lot of the practices that we've had at Dirwaza was taking exhibitions from the UAE or being invited by different institutions or different places outside of the UAE to consider a particular theme and to put together an exhibition of UAE-based artists. And so when we talk about the UAE, I don't talk about local only, like Emirati passport holders, when we're looking at the art scene, because the art scene is so diverse and we spill in onto one another. There's this hybridization that's taking place and has been taking place for years. And that is what makes the UAE special. That is what makes the UAE. And so here are some examples of exhibitions that we have worked on outside of the UAE, and it becomes very interesting to consider your audience where you are. So A Return to the Ground is as an exhibition that took place in Tokyo. It was in response to the Year of Sustainability. The term sustainability is very trendy, so I really wanted to begin to consider how we can anchor it and think about it from a local perspective, and how we can connect it to a culture that exists within Japan. And so from that, we started to kind of look at the practices of rituals, the idea of movement, the idea that sustainability is a simple idea of kind of returning to the ground. I remember the day when a dining table was placed in my grandfather's house, because we used to eat on the floor. And so really understanding that separation of body and ground became sort of the leading idea within this exhibition. This second exhibition, While the Coffee Grounds Settle, Stories by Women in the UAE, took place in Fathom Gallery in Washington, D.C. And this was a very interesting exhibition because it was an exhibition that wanted to celebrate Emirati Women's Day. And so these terms of empowerment and just terms that really, I think, needed to be corrected from our perspective. Women in the UAE have always been present, have always been at the forefront of almost everything, even historically at the capacity that they existed. And when you are in the US, they assume, oh, poor little Arab girl, like, oh, her parents must be so hard on her, and this is why she's in the US, to find her liberation, et cetera, et cetera. And so this exhibition became extremely important because it corrected those narratives or it challenged those ideas, and people are open. People just need to have conversations, And so this exhibition really allowed us that space, and I happened to have a fully female team who was there with me, but that's just the nature of how it happened. We decided on this title, While the Coffee Grounds Settle, because women gather around coffees, sit down, there's the space of the majlis, there's the space of gathering, exchange, giving, taking, and also controlling narratives. So the exhibition had alongside it a lot of public programming where we came in and did a lot of talks and different workshops, and we had people coming in from the first day. They would come in again and again and again, every day, the same individuals with different questions. And for me, that's what success, or what a successful exhibition should be doing. Last but not least is an exhibition that's very dear to my heart, titled Evaporating Suns. And Evaporating Suns was an exhibition that took place, commissioned exhibition that took place in KBHG, which is in Basel. And it took us about 3 years to kind of come to this exhibition. And I looked at myth. And myth is a worldly thing. You know, everybody has grown up with myths, so it's a place where now you can allow people to enter into this conversation. And at the same time, we begin to kind of talk about our landscape and our social, the social landscape as well, through these exhibitions, or through these myths, sorry. And one of the most important things for me was to highlight the Arabic language. And so you would walk around Basel and you would find these posters everywhere. So you can also see that there's like politics within placement of language in spaces. So I had the Arabic language first and giant, and then everything else followed. And the idea is because these myths are from the Arab Gulf, that it became extremely important to kind of point towards them, point towards the Arabic language as the anchor of everything, but also showcase maps, because a lot of people don't know the difference between the different countries within the Gulf. And so this map really allowed us a very playful space to extend everything that we know about the region through myths. So moving on. Last but not least, I think I'm almost there. Programming is something that becomes extremely important. Whether we are working on an exhibition or not, we always try to stay relevant within the space of programming, because that is the space of conversation. It's a human space. It's a space of extension and accessibility for a lot of people. On the left, you have an example of us at Career Days in Art Jamil, where we get to talk to the upcoming generation about what we do and how we do it. In the middle, which Reem will be talking a little bit more about public art. Abu Dhabi, we curated a series of talks that invites the audience to interrupt the speakers in a way that allows for it to be more public, so really kind of questioning the term public within public art and public talks. And then we have an internship program that takes place every few months. To close this off, and questions that I would like you guys to think about alongside me, and I'd love to have a conversation at any point. Why is it important to rethink the structures around knowledge transfer? This is a really big question. Knowledge transfer is a term that we heard a lot, especially when the big museums came in, that we are going to be receiving knowledge from these individuals that are coming in, but the reality is that they also needed to receive knowledge. So, you know, kind of the pace of this knowledge transfer, or the circular nature of it should be more discussed. What does it mean to localize global audiences, and how does that lead to a more authentic global representation? How can we be more aware regarding a variety of cultures and languages in the structure of the English language, as opposed to their specified mother tongue? What does that do to the contemporary culture of the world? Shukran.
I didn't get to properly introduce people, and the bios do say Munira Al Sayegh, and it's alphabetical by first name, if you'd like to know who you just listened to. She's a really, really important participant in the shaping of the future of the field in the UAE and globally. So thank you so much, Munira. And now, finally, back to Reem Fadda.
With a glitch. I'll just keep it at that. Thank you so much. Thank you, Maya and NYU Abu Dhabi, for helping organizing such an important gathering. And I did want to also, you know, say my thanks to my elders like Salwa, who's been my mentor too, Manal, and my colleagues like Munira and Bana that have, you know, with them, you can see a power of women that have really helped shape an authentic cultural scene. I've been asked by Maya to rapidly talk about Guggenheim Abu Dhabi, all our public art initiatives, so, and not be promotional. So allow me to do this, okay? We're gonna try this very quickly. So I wanna set the stage. I'll begin by saying Guggenheim Abu Dhabi and some of the kind of shaping ideas. It has taken nearly 20 years to build that institution. And sorry, I wanna go one step backward to say, I thought about a kind of thematic thread, and I would say there has been a real concerted effort in Abu Dhabi, given, I want to say, a progressive leadership and possibility of asking us to rethink and shape culture and our institutions in the way that suits the image of this place and of our extended region, and speaking south to south. So this is something I want you to be very cognizant of. And the examples I'm setting forward are ways of demonstrating how we have attempted to do that. Maybe we're failing, and maybe we're not, but we're trying. And in the vocabulary of culture, that is already something that is quite, I want to say, potent. So Guggenheim Abu Dhabi, it's nearly 20 years in the making. People ask me, why has it taken such a long time? Guess what? We've had to reformulate global history. It's broken from the inside out and from institutions everywhere. So we've had to look deep and hard into it and ask about representation for our region, specifically West Asia, North Africa, the Gulf, Africa, Asia, Pan-Asia. What does it look like for an institution and museums? What does a collection that speaks to our people look like? So this is a real contention that, and a real kind of same time privilege, but this is something we put ourselves in the task of doing. You're asking why the Guggenheim? Well, the Guggenheim has a precedent and has the industry knowledge, but what you will see in Abu Dhabi is entirely here. And it's been based off here, and the thinking has been based on thinking about reciprocity, circular, let's say, commonalities, thinking about ways of our philosophy that bring us together, openness, ethics about Abu Dhabi that are extremely, extremely essential. And it's important to say that we're very much a non-essentialist culture. And I speak proudly as being a citizen in Abu Dhabi that I feel that way. Non-essentialism is something we really need to teach the world these days. So I'll just put that forward too. And then, so Guggenheim Abu Dhabi, I don't have demonstrative images. My colleagues will talk about it with much more assertiveness and showcase that. But this is, I would say, as being part of it from 2009, I can definitely say that it's doing something for us. And I do want to say that institutional building in a place like our region, you've seen it, guys. Our entire countries have been eradicated. Institutions are our place of safeguarding our legacy. And this means ever so much for someone like me, a Palestinian, and I know what it means every day, this institutionalizing effort for us and for this region. So we cannot, we cannot dismiss that. And the shared kind of common goal to reformulate it on a global structure with the Guggenheim is an important effort. And this is something we can commend them for looking into that as a partner with us. Now, another line, I was in another hat of my other things that I do, Public Art Abu Dhabi. I've been asked to spearhead a strategy a couple of years ago in the Department of Culture and Tourism where I work, and thinking about public art. And again, this is another way for us. I'm someone who's still wearing the institutional hat, working with the museum, but also thinking about the public. And we devised a strategy of saying, really thinking about art in the public and for the public, very basic, right? So we're gonna go all the way. And then we thought, well, there's a particularity for Abu Dhabi itself, right? I don't know how much you know about Abu Dhabi, but it's not just the desert, but it's an archipelagos of more than I think 240 something islands. So it has a fantastic vista. We've decided, and because we have extreme weather conditions too, which means, you know, not every sculpture is really gonna withstand. We've had stories of sculptures exploding in Abu Dhabi from the sheer heat. So having known that, it meant we have to study this landscape in a very different methodology. But we have such a beautiful place, such an important, you know, landscape. And people who know me know that I'm not one for white walls. I'm the advocate of curatorial, you know, work that goes on the non-white wall. Go out, go in the ruins, you know, show the art in the spaces that really speak to the living. And we can go into that thinking because, you know, this is the anti-model of industrial thinking, which again, this is the place that does not owe those dues. We are not the industrial world. We are a different world. I like to think of us as the world of Jama', and this is something that I've been thinking about really strongly. This idea that allows us to think about Jama' means the collective. The buzzword in other places is the cornerstone of larger cultures in the global south, and particularly Muslim cultures here. And this is the defining aspect of what brings our societies together. And this is something that we need to think about how our art, our culture reflects into that. I would say that the modules of these public art projects are endeavors to do so. And very, you know, I would say they're small. They're a little token of endeavors to do so and to reflect that culture of collectivity and plurality. And for us, you know, we devised a program where we have events for public art, and therefore we speak to our people, and we have community engagement in the way that really matters. And we insert our artists in places in our city that make up a dialogue and a reciprocity that can qualify for something maybe meaningful, maybe it stays then. So it's much more of a, you know, it does have this kind of reciprocal relationship, and, you know, it's a trial. So we propose two events that happen biannually. The Public Art Biennial, which I'm so happy that you're here and you can see it. And we've organized, the team has organized a fantastic kind of tour for all of you. I hope you enjoy all of the aspects of it. I'm gonna show you some images so you really wanna go. And then Mawrid Abu Dhabi was the one that happened the year before that. And Mawrid Abu Dhabi is a light art exhibition or platform. She's the next curator, I just want to tell you, with Alia Luta, so we have a big moment. And then it's not been announced yet, but I just did that, so it's okay. Oh yeah. So basically, Mawrid Abu Dhabi looks at a formula of the city in its, you know, in its archipelago status. So it created a formula of light, art, water, and nature. Beautiful. Like, it couldn't have been more simple, yet more amazing. It took art into the islands. It took art into, we don't have to go through all of this here. This was Mawrid Abu Dhabi, Shilpa Gupta, Jim Denovan on Fahd Island. You know, islands we never knew. Mangroves that we never went to. Like, it was an opportunity for us to rediscover Abu Dhabi, which is absolutely just, you know, captivating. And it spoke so simply and so fantastically to our audiences. Everybody understood it. You didn't need, we had the docents, we did everything, we did the education, we did the educational workshops, everything was there, but it also just spoke to people, which is something really important. They kept on asking us about the pyramids, but it's okay. Rafael Lozano Hammer created an exhibition, full exhibition, 10 works of his on Lulu Island, spectacular, dealing with language and translation, and a sort of meson beam of relationships. And it really kind of, you can already tell how that from his Pulse Island project into the landscape of Abu Dhabi from in front of it. Nadia Kabelinke did Beit Noor. All of them were commissions, 40 commissions. So, you know, we were 3 people working on this project. I mean, it's a real Alia Luta being one of them here. Jumeiri on the vista of Lulu Island. Karsten Holler's piece. I just want to say one quick anecdote. You tell me when I have to stop. Karsten Holler, I go there the day before the event to try to see if everything's working, everything's on. You know, a lot wasn't, you know, it's a big problem. We're in the middle of the public space. But I was with my boss and we saw, this was on, a family, I believe South Asian, with a kid. It was like 8 p.m. We're there alone. And they were seated. And, you know, obviously the parents had been, like me, a long day, and I have to take my daughter at the end of the day to some playground. They've taken her to the Corniche where it's free. And this girl was flying. She was dancing. She was not even 8. She was dancing in the lights. She was the star of the show. And that was it. I was like, we've got it. We reached. And I do want to say, Manar Abu Dhabi reached more than 700,000 people. Numbers do matter sometimes. The biennial in its first 2 months reached more than 2 million people. And we're not counting passersby. We counted people that went, engaged with the work, asked the questions, took the publications, read the labels. We counted those people. So these things do matter, and they made a very big difference for us. So I'll just go through quick images in 2 minutes. Yes? This is the biennial, so don't miss it. Okay, I'm just showing you. This is, you're gonna see this when you go, so yeah. Bus terminal. We looked at modern heritage. We looked at going into the city this time with a biennial. And we started off our first edition by questioning the ontology of public art for Abu Dhabi, for nature, community, indigeneity, heritage, and urbanism. How does that make sense? We have 72 artists, so many installations across Abu Dhabi and Al Ain. And it's really quite captivating. I'm going through very quick images because you're going to see many of this. Interactive pieces, Culture Foundation. Yeah. Again, the bus terminal. Wa'il Shawqi is our commission, the one in Venice, for the biennial. Yes. And Daniel Buran's stripes on the bus terminal. Wa'il Awar's award-winning piece from Venice has now finally manifested in a pavilion. Afra and Tariq. And Afra Dhahri, don't miss the performance in the evening. I know it's late, you're gonna be tired, but go. And Tariq. Thank you very much.
That was amazing. Yes, please sit and relax. Katya Arfara is on our faculty. She's a curator, and her bio is under the letter K, I believe. Come on up. And then what we'll do is everyone who's just presented will jump up on stage, and Andreas will lead a very short Q&A as we try to make up some lost time because of my own personal Mercury in retrograde.
Can I change? Okay, it's fine. Yeah, hello. Thank you, Maya, for the invitation. I'm very glad to welcome you all here in NYU Abu Dhabi. I will also be very brief. Maya asked me to share a little bit my trajectory, what was my curatorial practice before joining NYU Abu Dhabi in 2019, and how this new home had an impact on my curatorial thinking and scholarly research, because I will speak today from a double perspective, as a curator and as a scholar. So, as I said, I will focus the first part of this brief presentation on some projects that have been curated in Athens. And you can see here in this slide the installation of Gregor Schneider, Invisible City. it's a site-specific installation I curated at Omonia Square in Athens 2017. So the public art projects I will share with you today were commissioned by the Onassis Stegi as part of the Fast Forward Festival I initiated in 2014, and I curated for the 6 editions till 2019 as part of my tenure at the Onassis Center as the Theatre and Dance Artistic Director. So the festival emerged at a time when the city was the epicenter of the socio-political, economic and migration crisis in the European and the global south. So also some of the projects I need to mention were co-commissioned, 2 of them actually with Sharjah Art Foundation. So Sharjah was for me the first time that I entered this part of the world. So I initiated the Fast Forward Festival despite and because of this polarized social and political context as a call to rethink spatial and social enclosures and publicly address the question, who has the right to the city? So the festival temporarily occupied train stations, parks, abandoned state buildings, ports, warehouses, squares, courtyards, semi-finished constructions, as the one you see here from X Apartments project 2015, asylums, again from X Apartments project, empty parking lots, polykatikies, classic Athenian apartment buildings, but also archaeological sites, Hikaru Fuji project 2017, Piraeus Heterochronia. Empty deserted libraries, such as this one, Hikaru Fuji Primary Fact Project at the deserted library of the law school in Athens. So revealing, in a way, the potentiality of art to reimagine and potentially transform dominant spatial taxonomies. So all these projects, of course, were based on intense year-long research periods, sometimes even more, in collaboration with grassroots organizations and human rights initiatives, as well as with educators, researchers, and scientists. So participation was redefined as a complex relationship between artistic practices, the surrounding environment, and the audience in an attempt to unsettle binaries such as social efficacy and aesthetic legitimacy. So the emphasis, in a way, was given on the project, on the process, on the research, on the trajectory, but also on the final product. So as someone with Athenian roots, I was born and raised in Athens, who experienced the intensifying sociospatial polarization in the last decade, I envisioned the name of the festival as a contradiction. So I wanted somehow to signify the direct, urgent manner in which we can reflect as curators upon urgent sociopolitical issues, and at the same time slow down the velocity of cultural production. I invited artists from different parts of the world to take their time to investigate, explore, reflect on unconventional, I could say, spectatorial modes and collective forms of learning and unlearning, seeing and unseeing. So I asked also that they said, aside preconceptions that may have had about the city and Greece, given the significant global media attention at that time paid to the exceptional Greek crisis. So in a way, go beyond the Greek exceptionality. So my argument is that a slow curatorial method that was is the title of my short intervention today, that results from embodied relationships among the artists, participants, and the city inhabitants, but also other than human species, and space itself, can generate alternative social relations. And this is the focus of my new book. I'm sorry, Maya, for this very short self-promotion. So Curating the Commons, Socially Engaged Public Art, forthcoming by the University of Michigan Press, explores precisely this performance-centered public art as a productive means to slowly unmake exclusive forms of belonging and slowly repair shattered urbanities. Because, of course, when we speak about space, we speak about forms of belonging, of memory, but also of accessibility. So introducing performance into the public space, It was a strong performative element in all these ephemeral public interventions. Introducing performance as a model for symbiotic living allowed me to involve multiple communities, as I said, who were not necessarily familiar with art in the research and the creation process. So during the preparation period, but also in the moment of sharing the projects, addressing their social concerns in aesthetic terms. During their field research for the project Pamphilos, a friend of all in Greek, launched on May 2018 on the House of Maria Callas. To give you one more example, Rax Media Collective encountered multiple commonic initiatives that arose in Greece during the austerity years, and to explore, they wanted actually to explore how collective ways can reshape the commons of the city, but not only as responses to the collapse of economy, but also as anticipations of a future marked by the liveliness of commons of all kinds. So, and of course they were speaking about, social clinics, social pharmacies, community gardens, etc. And you can see here actually one slide from the discussion that we had the public program during the whole period of the installation, and also a small still from Deep Breath, a 25 minutes film that was one of the components of this installation and which has been a long afterlife. It was included in several exhibitions after the end of the Fast Forward Festival. So slow curating, or curating from below, involved a minimum of audience. So here you can see some stills from the Dries Verhoeven No Man's Land project, the first public project I curated for the Fast Forward Festival. They had 20 viewers with iPods providing audio information, followed 20 migrants through the streets of Athens in a moment of extreme polarization in Greece, where the Golden Dawn was very powerful and already third party in the parliament. So a large number of audience, sometimes, some other times, such as here, a project by Ktodelat and Anton Katz, is the pavilion of a component of a large project which included tours, sound installations, puppet plays, and of course a very rich public program. And of course, all these projects were based and structured around everyday dramaturgical gestures, such as walking. This is a photo from Akira Takayama's Piraeus Heterotopia. So all these projects were based on extensive research because I wanted, as I said, to foster this kind of slow, decelerated spectatorship that engaged audience in an active perception of the complex phenomenon of a shared common space. So since I joined New York University, Abu Dhabi as an academic, I was particularly intrigued to investigate actually the effects of the rapid social and economical change from pearl to petroleum culture in the Gulf economies and the material manifestations of the region's cultural legacies. And here you can see a public sculpture which has been destroyed a few years ago because it was a kind of resettlement of the whole village. It's a sculpture by Munira Al Alien Technology, at the heart of Dubai Heritage Village in 2014, where the artist engages with the unsustainability of planet destabilizing fossil fuel production and consumption, interweaving the maritime realm of pearl diving with oil's material manifestations. So Munira was for me one of the first artists on whom I started to work very closely with in order to understand this kind of transition and interconnectedness between these cultures, the P cultures, pearl and petroleum culture, as Munira says. So I'm always particularly intrigued also by the vernacular roundabout art, these semi-public hyper landmarks which claim a permanent place in urban social life, and the semantics of tangible heritage in the historically transient and impermanent architecture of the Gulf cities. Here is a photo of Sophie Therese Trenka Dalton from the photographic series of roundabout monuments in the UAE back in 2014. And I would like to share one picture that also Reem shared with you of Farah Al-Qasimi, Homesickness 2024. You will see it later at the Corniche Road. And I like to actually reflect on this kind of connection between the monuments in the roundabouts and the new the reflection of contemporary artists on this national heritage, tangible symbols of national heritage. So the local geopolitical and geographical frameworks I encountered made me reconsider binaries such as native versus alien, passivity versus interaction, but also private versus public. And at the same time, NYU Abu Dhabi, highly diverse community, encouraged me to set in motion collaborations across disciplines, such as the research kitchens that the Arts and Humanities and our Dean initiated in 2020. So my involvement in the Anthropocene kitchen, the subtitle is Urbanism, the Environment and Sustainability. So sustainability comes back in our discussion. Allowed me to give you an example, to give another example, to co-commission actually, together with some colleagues who are part of the Elements pod of the Anthropocene kitchen, Dale Hudson, Shidel Majitia, and Karno Dasgupta, who I think is here somewhere in the audience, research-based works on more than human environments to alumni and MFA students, such as, this is my last slide, Maya, such as the multimedia installation by Dima Abu Zanad, second year now MFA student, where the artist combines Arabic poems with musical compositions and sounds from the Beirut shore. And you can see here the slides on your right. The artist and NYU Abu Dhabi alumni Saidi Padi and Isha Gandham own the Socotra cormorant bird and its nesting colonies in Al Quain, who are endangered. They try actually to create a kind of counter archive on this local resident of the peninsula. And these who have just presented it a few days ago on a workshop focusing on the element of water in collaboration with the Center for Genomics and Kirsten Adepli Laboratory in Biology. So thank you and looking forward to our discussion.
We're going to have a super fast Q&A. Yes, please come up. And Salwa. Oh, no. Okay, then you get to be Salwa. No? Okay. All right. Well, when she comes back, she can answer the questions that she has. And so I'm going to set a very strict timer of 5 minutes in order to help us catch up. Yes, which means we get 1 question from you and 2 from the audience.
Hello? Yeah. Well, this is really rapid fire, but I do have the time machine, Maya, so I'll have maybe go back 5 minutes, and I'll have 10 minutes. We can have 10 minutes, all right?
And by the way, this is Professor Andreas Valentin, who's an artist, photographer, and photography historian, I believe.
Yeah, 1 question. Well, actually, what I did while all of you were speaking, I took some notes, and I picked up some keywords from each one of your talks, which I will read in a sequence, and I think they all connect. And this is my question maybe to all of you. How does your work and your research connect between yourselves, among yourselves? So the keywords that I picked up, beginning with Salwa and Al-Mawrid, and I begin actually with the translation of the word Al-Mawrid, meaning source. Okay, this is maybe a very good beginning for everything, the source of everything, of art, of culture, of us, right, of the geography that was so much mentioned here as well. Then we move on to archive, of course, and how many of the works that were shown and the projects that were shown here deal with archives and oral histories, especially in Al-Mawrid as well. And this leads me then to dreams, right? And how your grandfather, right? Which language do you dream in, okay? I guess we can dream, and today we must dream in many different languages, which leads us to translation, right, which you also approached, to translation, specifically in the case of women that you mentioned, which I thought was very interesting. How do you translate, in the U.S., the sort of stereotype of women in the Arab world, right? And that's still, it's not only in the U.S., by the way, everywhere, including Brazil, where I come from, okay? So this leads me to exchange, right? How do we exchange ideas and thoughts and translate these ideas and thoughts and exchange them? And this leads me to rethinking and shaping culture, right? Which is what you have been working so extensively, not only in the Guggenheim, but especially also in the public art, right? And bringing arts, public art, into the public. I mean, making it public, right? And lastly, the seen and unseen ideas that Katja mentioned, right? Which have to do, of course, directly with migration. I mean, migrants are invisible, and they're not seen. And how do we see them? Not the migrant, not only the people, but the whole process of migration, which leads me, of course, to the UAE, which is a country so new and very much based also on migration from so many different places, especially from other countries in the region and North Africa and South Asia. And to end, I didn't make a question, right? But maybe one of you would like to comment on this sequence of words, which I think connect, like I said, everyone. And this brings me to the very beginning of the session this morning, Manal, speaking of well-being. I think all of this, in the end, really has to do, and very much so in the world we live in today, with making sure that we become better, and well-being is really a big part of this, right? So, yeah, after this confusing maybe, it's very, Maya gave me a very difficult task. Hopefully I'll, be able to make some sense out of it. So yeah, this is what I propose, that maybe briefly each one of you could, and then we open it up to the public as well, yeah? Yeah. These connections, how do you think, I'll begin with you, Munira, okay? How do you think all of these ideas were brought up in the last 50 minutes or 55 minutes or so connect among themselves? Archive, histories, exchange, translation, etc.
I think what you begin to see is the importance of history, and also the importance of everybody learning histories that are more diverse than the histories that we are usually taught, or the histories that have become more easily accessible. It kind of puts curiosity in place in order to understand where you are via this history, and how this history also migrates. I think from that, to kind of jump points, I think from that you end up learning about language also, which is a big part of history, understanding the language that history came from. I agree with you. I do believe that we do think in multiplicity, and that's how we have to behave in this day and age. But you can't just be diluted in multiplicity. You have to have an understanding of the role of your body alongside the earth that you occupy, I believe. And so from that, I guess this is where the contemporary space takes place, where we are, through the artwork that we are producing and through the narratives that we are kind of studying and researching and trying to put out onto the forefront, we are a part of the world, but we are also who we are, and who we are here within the UAE is this, again, multiple space of multiple ethnicities and religions and languages, etc. I don't know if I answered your question.
Yes,
absolutely. Thank you. I mean, it's a very large existential kind of posturing, but
exercise,
I would say,
maybe.
Yeah, I would just say that. For me, I would only simplify it in a way to say that we're all doing this in an attempt to grapple with the living, right? For me, this kind of philosophical idea of living is really, really important. We're trying to slow down time, the rapid time of modernity, industrialization that has completely evaporated that from us. We want to bring us down to, understanding coffee, culture, sitting with our grandfathers, sitting with our friends, hugging them. I'm going to go to a play date for my daughter right after this. We need time to live. And we need to, if that, for all of those reasons, if we're not all attempting in some way to bring that back to this level of authenticity in our cultural makeup, for our well-being, for the betterment of our societies in that way, then I don't know why we're doing it.
Let's all slow down for sure.
And that brings us to, thanks Andreas for the question, and that brings us, Reem, to this notion of slow curating, and perhaps slow producing. This notion, another way to think about disruption also, which is the title of this gathering. No? I'm thinking also a lot about this notion of interconnectedness, and also multi-species environments. Since I joined Abu Dhabi, I think, and because of the diversity of its ecosystem, something that we normally don't pay attention to. There is kind of famous, slogan that deserts are empty, but of course deserts are not empty, and it's such a rich flora and fauna that somehow it's invisible. So I'm thinking a lot, how can we somehow engage as residents, inhabitants of this place of the world, with all the inhabitants, this kind of more than human.
I would absolutely say that is essential, especially that in this slowness we get a moment to also think about the urgencies, right? And this brings us back to the Mawrid, or the source, because we thought about this, which is, in this slowness, in this ability to harness the moment, in this ability to think about our urgencies, what are we losing? And, and it is, we're losing a lot of things pertaining to our histories, our living environments, our cultural legacies. And it's, I think with this idea of what is pertinent, we are able to capture that.
And the whole planet, perhaps, we are losing it.
Yeah, I want to add to that having done similar work in the United States and then came here to help establish the center, I would say the opportunities offered by this Gulf, and in particular the UAE, and the NYU are immense. I would never have had these opportunities in the US. And also there is an openness and acceptance. And that's why we have the diverse community, because there is an acceptance and tolerance, which is very important. And for us at the center, the past is as important as the future that we are working towards. And so the material that we're preserving, as Reem said, is preserving the legacy and also rewriting history using these primary documents and ensuring that they continue for future generations.
Perfect. Thank you so much. Do we have time for one question, maybe? Not even one? One quick question?
We are not living slow. We're living on the fast lane of this conference.
Sorry about that. Okay, thank you.
We want to make sure there's time for them to see the public art.
I didn't have time to thank you, Maya, and thank everyone. Yeah.
Thank you.
What I would like to say is, let's take 3 minutes for a restroom break. If you need it, we'll reset for the next grouping within 3 minutes. Very sorry to have to rush, but in a way this is good because you feel the urgency of the need to connect more. Okay, sorry to make this so fast, but it's going to be worth it if we can catch up. If everyone could come back to their seats. Anyone who thought I was the shy, quiet person in the room now knows better. Okay, please have a seat. Okay, if we could open to the next slide for the next presentation. The next section is, so we just went from the behind the scenes, thinking about what we're doing when we make an exhibition, curatorial practice, archives, and so on. In this next section, I'm thinking about what I'm calling out front, right? What is the experience in relationship to where we are, which we've already been talking about, but also what can it be and what might it be that it hasn't been yet, or the opportunities that are in front of us. And to do that, I introduce Stephanie Rosenthal, who's not you, she's down there, and Hussein Mustafa, and their bios are there. They're both, Stephanie's the director of the Guggenheim Abu Dhabi project, and Hussein is the senior curator, head of exhibitions, to talk about that institution. And then Tina Sherwell and Terry Geis, who are co-directors of the MFA at NYU Abu Dhabi, will be talking about the university as an institution in the context of the MFA. And then we'll move from there into the section on place directly. Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you a lot, Maya, and thank you to you and Alfredo for bringing all these amazing people here. I remember we started to talk about a year and a half, and since then I'm looking forward to have many different thinkers with us, and I'm looking forward to hear from you, so I hope we'll have some time in between and tonight to really share, so we know a bit better who we're actually talking to. I think we can be a bit quicker because Reem luckily talked already a bit about the Guggenheim Abu Dhabi, and as she said, she was there from the beginning and very much part of forming this institution. What I always feel is important to say, and it's exciting for us, is that it's really a true collaboration between a New York Foundation, the Salaman Guggenheim Foundation, where we both are representatives of, and the Abu Dhabi government. And so it's a huge joy and an honor, and I think for me also always a kind of really characteristic for this region, the generosity to bring people in, to work with them, to have conversations, and to build something together and to learn from each other. So when I started 2.5 years ago, one of my important tasks was really to build a team here in Abu Dhabi, to live here with my family and to bring curators, amazing minds like Mustafa here to work with us and continue and kind of in a way also accelerate the work which has been done for so many years. And obviously the collection building is very important and has been important since nearly 20 years. And what we are doing now is really kind of, we always say it's a bit like massaging the museum as an organism, and to say that the collection is an important part, but what's so important, and we have heard it from His Excellency, is really what are these museums doing and how are we places of conversation. And a lot, I think what Avam said about the relational, how we think together, that's something which I feel is really in a place like here possible. And so it's exciting to see that you'll have time to see what's actually going on in this region, and you can participate in what we're trying to do together. And so when I started, one of the first kind of conversation partners actually was Mustafa in building the curatorial team here and to bring you as the curatorial lead. And I remember like the first, like our workshops, because a lot of the things we're doing is still imagining, right? Because the museum is building. And I remember walking down the hallway with you and you said, well, it's all speculation as long as we, so we speculate a lot together. And you came from Singapore, and one of your credentials is really that you have built a gallery there, a collection there. You've participated 15 years and were there when it opened. And so you made your way over to work with us, and now I think we say we enjoy these last moments of imagining, because we're gone into implementation and thinking through finalizing all the kind of collection displays and programs. So maybe it would be good to hear where are you right now? These talks are always also a moment to say what was surprising, what is left from the speculation we had.
No, thank you, Stephanie. And I think there were two incredible forewords that accompanied our talk today. I mean, first with Bana, who is now with us. It's a tremendous honor and pleasure. And of course, the undefeatable Reem Father, who spoke earlier. And I think, in a sense, it goes back to how often we think of institutions, or museums rather, as kind of structures and buildings. But as you rightly pointed out, in fact, these are organisms, and they are much more fluid than we actually think they are. And I mean, just to reflect a bit on my work in Singapore, in fact, I don't come from the discipline of art history. I've always had a rather complex relationship with it, especially for those of us in Singapore, because art history, in a sense, for the longest time we were told would become inclusive. But in fact, we came to realize that actually it was far more exclusive than what was being said out loud. And so the project in Singapore, especially at the National Gallery and at the Singapore Art Museum, was really premised on understanding whether modernism and its associated bedfellow art history were truly inclusive concepts. And we started to kind of unpack it, disentangle it, and started doing all sorts of interesting things, not just building collections and connecting with what I call the region intellectual, right? So essentially thinkers who had built perspectives in such a strong and impressive manner that you could not ignore them. But as a result, the universal claims of modernism were not living up to that standard. So there was clearly a discrepancy, right, between what was being said and what was being felt on the ground. And so much of the work tried to bridge this kind of invisible gap. It's a gap that we all know exists, but somehow don't want to fully acknowledge, because if we are to truly bridge that gap, we're going to have a lot of very difficult conversations along the way. And I think, in a sense, whilst we've seen huge progress in terms of technology, in terms of logistics, world trade, geopolitics, for the better or for the worse, somehow the discipline of art history has lagged behind in terms of this kind of true globalization and true representation, if we truly want to have that conversation. And so the work in Singapore was built on this premise. And it was built along the premise of bringing all these incredible thinkers, not just from Southeast Asia, but from across the world. And to say that if we are to truly have a wild conversation, no one's going to do it alone. You're going to need allies, you're going to need friends, you're going to need comrades, and then you're really having a dialogue and a conversation. And I think, if you ask me, for me, the Guggenheim Abu Dhabi is also a promise in that direction. To try and also open up these canons of thinking, Reem brought up that word earlier as well, into kind of much more, I would say, infiltrations of alter thinkings, no? Alter moderns, other ways of kind of thinking about how we can now actually prospect the future. And I just wanted to offer an anecdote, because we have his work in the collection, the incredible M.F. Hussain, the painter, the provocateur, the sheer beauty that he brought. And I have another story to tell, but I'll start with this one, just to kick things off. It's 1960s, and M.F. Hussain finds himself in New York. And he's approached by a gallerist, and he says, the gallerist asks M.F. Hussain, why don't you paint in the abstract style? And to this, M.F. Hussain responds, there is nothing abstract about 800 million people, and now over 1 billion. So in a sense, I think Hussain kind of leads us into all these incredible questions. And of course, how M.F. Hussain finds himself in the UAE in the early 2000s. So I think these histories are connected, these histories are rich, and it's a matter of us now taking it forward, truly. And I just wanted to ask you as well, Stephanie, in terms of your shift and how you worked with all these avant-garde figures over the years, and I've admired your practice much well before you moved to the UAE. Could you speak a little bit about this, and also how you imagine the public vis-a-vis the institution, right? Because we've been given the brief to speak about the institution as a word, as a phrase.
So I think I'll answer that, but to continue, I think what we all know, when Mustafa is on stage, there's always a story. And I want to say that a lot of what we do also in the institution, I think that's something where we, want to connect the community, our audience with the institution, is the storytelling, and to kind of connect on a very personal level. And I think that is something, when you think how institutions, museums have developed over the last decades, and our institution in a way is growing since 20 years, it is to also see how has institution building changed, and how a place like the Guggenheim Abu Dhabi is a place where that change can really happen. I mean, I come out of a tradition where I would be in big meetings and everybody would nod and say, we have to do this different, and then nothing happens for 15 years. And here you have meetings and you say, let's do it this way, and the next time you come in, you think, oh, it has already happened. So it's a place where things, I think, are really, truly in constant transformation. And I think that's, when we think about institutions, that's very different, right? Because you really feel that a museum like we're building can only live if you participate in that change, and if you have it in a way that you talk to each other, like that we get away from thinking we as an institution can tell our audience, but more, what are the mechanisms to learn from our audience and to build this community? Because obviously, I mean, we don't want to ignore the challenge we're having in building such a large institution and at the same time building its community. And how do we do that? And the way of saying, I think, and my journey to admit that a lot of that is also just being able to just try it out, to kind of see how does this work step by step. And I think it's a huge privilege to do that with a large institution. So we always say we're really big, but at the same time we're really small. Like, to live in these kind of contradictions, I think is incredibly inspiring also for the artists. Like, you build an institution for here with the people here, but at the same time you have a very prominent partner internationally, so that you kind of bridge that is very exciting for practitioners and for artists to have that possibility. And so the power of that, I think, and which is obviously very much based on respect. And I think that's something which for me coming was an enormous joy to see how these different fields can work together and learn from each other, and how, that what we say, the knowledge transfer is very much on both sides, and that both entities are respecting that, and that someone like me, a European, comes to be based here to represent also the American institution is already a way of openness, and I think to foster this conversation.
Okay. I think we have to
wrap up.
Apologies, I didn't get to finish my second story, but that's for another time.
Tell the story while I change
the
slides.
Can I?
Yes.
Well,
you may. I'll allow it.
I just wanted to tell that when MF Hussain was living here in the UAE in the mid-2000s, he said that what fascinates me about this place is not just its awareness of a past and a history, but also its futurism. And he didn't see these as kind of binary opposites. Both could coexist and evolve together. And I think, in a sense, Hussein's life is an inspiration in that regard, and something I guess institutions could learn from and benefit from immensely. Yeah.
I agree. I'm going to now move over to the MFA program at NYU Abu Dhabi, and I think we're at the place we should be with the slides. Amazing. Okay.
Okay, yeah. Hello. Thank you so much, Maya, for organizing this and for having us have this to be able to talk about the MFA program. So the MFA in Art and Media began in 2021. So it's a new program, and we do say that it's one of its kind in the region. And I'm not meaning to be promotional, but I actually want to explain that and to unpack that a little bit. So if we consider and think about regional art education, if we look back historically, and the Mawrid has an incredible rich resource of this in their collection on art education in the region. You'll see that artists were traveling to Egypt, traveling to Iraq, traveling to Syria, Lebanon, also further afield to the US and to Europe for art education. But if we look at the question of graduate programs in the region, there isn't an extensive amount, and a program that is interdisciplinary and contemporary, there are very, very few of those. So a question that we had was, why NYU Abu Dhabi? And what kind of program would that be? And myself and Terry, with all our colleagues, have really had the privilege to be able to evolve the program, and for it to be very responsive to the types of students we have, to faculty and their research interests, to the location that we're in, and so we've been evolving the program. I think something that's really, really unique too is that we're not situated in an art school. And we're actually situated in the Division of the Arts and Humanities. This is an incredible opportunity because we have faculty in the program who are from art and art history, from theater, from film and new media, from creative writing, from anthropology, and they all contribute to the program. This really creates incredible dynamism and a space for learning in the MFA.
I can't. So Tina is really the heart and soul of this program. She works day and night to fulfill all of the vision of the program, both on the meta scale and on the minutia. And also, I just want to mention that there, as Tina said, there's a number of colleagues, many of whom are here today, faculty that we work with that teach generously for the program, that come regularly for studio visits with the students. This is one of the really crucial aspects of the program, which is that we try to be as flexible as possible and really leverage on the fact that there's a constant stream of significant artists, curators, intellectuals, filmmakers, thinkers that are coming through the UAE, and that we can bring them to meet with our students. It's an interesting fact that most of our students are women. We have had, I think, one in the 4 cohorts that we have so far admitted. We're about to admit our 5th. We've had one man. And so that's been quite interesting because, as you'll see I think you're all going to be able to make a visit to the studios, and you'll be able to walk through the studios and see some of the work, some of which you're seeing in the images that are rotating on the screen. But you'll see that there's a very, very strong ethos of communication and connection that's happening between the students in our cohorts and across the cohorts. But we're also very pleased with that a lot of our visitors that come for studio visits kind of reflect back to us that we don't have like a school style. You know, there isn't one style of work that's being generated out of the program. It's very, very interdisciplinary, very, very flexible, very open, very heavily research-based, and we're just so thrilled with the way that the program is evolving. We also really, really benefit from collaborative partners such as 421, where we host the final exhibition for each of the graduating cohorts, and that's a collaboration that's been going on since the very beginning of the program as well.
And we also collaborate across the UAE, so we're using the UAE, you know, situating ourselves in the UAE as a space of learning. So students go to exhibition openings, symposiums. We've got partnerships with Art Jamil, with the Sharjah Art Foundation, with Alserkal, and those partnerships have been evolving and growing, and what's really exciting to see is the relations that are built. So when artists are coming through with their exhibitions, they're also coming to do studio visits here. Our students are going out there for artist talks and to participate, so there's a constant move in and out of the space of the university with these, with our cooperations, and we can really kind of see that evolving.
I think maybe for the sake of time, is there anything else that we should? We also are constantly thinking about new collaborations and working really, really closely as we can in conversations with the Guggenheim as it develops, and having the curators from the Guggenheim visit with our students, and just thinking about ways that we can be ever expanding the ecosystem in which we exist, which is so exciting for the students as we really witness the emergence of these next generations of artists that are working in the region. I don't know if you...
It's wonderful to share the stage with you, because I think there is a lot of things which are kind of intuitively connected in how things are approached. No, I mean, what Awam said was the relational, the conference we did in Dakar around Glisson and the idea of the relational museums, and I think how we learn and kind of participate in, you know, benefit from also professors and under you like Mancia Diawara, who's really kind of a guidance in relation to thinking with Glisson through this idea of the archipelagic museum and how no place is too small to be the center, and how that kind of reflects in it. So I think it's even if we try to stay away from the US big institutions relationships, there are these kind of like very, I think, organic ways of how we work with each other, and how we know that the students who come here, you know, similar to all the amazing artists who are already here, are people we want to kind of engage with and work with.
I mean, it's been really interesting to see that also the type of students who have been applying to the program over the years as well. So we have students who have from all over the world applying to the program, and that's really makes for really unique cohorts and conversations and collaborations across their work, and also at very different points in their career. So some students have been a couple of years out of their BFA, others have been practicing for maybe 2 decades and feel that this is the time that they want to do an MFA on a program and here, like ours, and here in the region. Yeah.
Thank you.
Okay.
Okay, so we'll do a swap of speakers. And in this last section, I've asked my colleagues to speak about their ideas about place, and they're all really fast talkers. So. I'm sorry. Oh, I shouldn't laugh in the microphone. Okay, hold on 1 second. Who's first? Okay, so first up, Pradeep Sharma, you are first. And what I'd love is if you'd come have a seat. Okay, we can go ahead and reveal this slide. I think it's
I don't really know what I'm doing here. Okay. Okay, I don't know how to make it fill the screen. Manuel, yeah, I need your help. Yeah, what is that about? Okay, good to go.
It's working. I'm going to talk really quickly so that we have time. I've completely misinterpreted Maya's brief, and so I've just come up with some thoughts and provocations. And it's really sort of based on really a lot of things that you've been hearing about the perceptions of the region, the perceptions of art, the trajectories, etc. So I just wanted to just share some of those thoughts. And the lovely privilege I've had over the years coming out of academia and coming into having to deliver is that I can be promiscuous about where I mine. And so the work is going to go everywhere. It's going to be a little bit fluffy, maybe. I don't know. There's no depth. But I think the spirit of it, and I ask you to sort of listen to it in the spirit of, I'm generally asking questions, so hopefully we can make different conclusions and have different understandings. So there are a lot of generalizations that are going to come. I'm going to gloss over a lot of things, but there's really just 7 ideas I want us to think about, and the way we've been thinking about some of the work that we've been doing together here. And I'm going to start off with Jose Gasset, and just a little quote, and I think it goes back to some of the questions around place. So I love his quote, yo soy yo y mi circunstancia. And I think this whole idea that we are embedded in a place, and that place does affect us, and that we cannot not be in that sort of scientific model of being completely outside and above the place that we live. And so this idea that there's a continual dialectic between us and the place, and it completely informs us as we inform it. And I think society's the same, I think place is the same. So as we make these gestures and we do Alserkal, or we do 421, or we do NYU Art Center, we change it and we're also changed by it. So I just want to sort of see that thought, that this is a dialectic that we're involved in. And in fact, everything's an experiment. So even though we think we know what we're doing, this strategy, we're learning as we're doing it. I also want to talk about this word culture that we use all the time. And I think something about the culture of the place, character of the place, whatever we want to call it. And this word is kind of fascinating. And I thought I love this image of the first complaint tablet is actually from 1500 BCE. But Lego have done a version of it for 2023. And I just think this idea that 3,000 years ago, we were still complaining, that Nani was writing to Nazir and was still complaining. So there's something about human nature that hasn't changed. And so this notion of time, speed, there's something in it that we should make sense of. I love being here. I love the call to prayer in the morning. It's the first time I've lived in an Islamic country. And so you start reading these different rhythms of everyday life. And this word culture is kind of really fascinating. And so sort of, you know, you find it in other cultures, and this is in Sanskrit, and Sanskriti is the closest word to it, and it kind of means values and belief systems, but it also means behaviors. And so what does this word culture mean? And quite often it's not enough. But if you look at sort of the word culture from the Latin sense, it has the same antecedents as cultivate. And so when you look at it, it's the place to be tilled, to inhabit a place sufficiently intensely to cultivate it, to be responsible for it, to respond to it, and to attend to it caringly. And so this word culture is kind of interesting. So we're all mining in it, and it is very much grounded in place. And so I wanted to sort of just make some of those connections about, even in nomadic life, people stayed long enough to make sense of the place. They tilled it, they cared for it. Then they moved on. And so how do we make sense of that in terms of the work we're doing? Idea number 3. And I kind of really fascinated about asking questions differently, looking at things differently. And what I love about Michael Pollan's thing about the botany of desire, he says that humans chose to, that there are over 30,000 edible plants. We commercialize 150 of them. And he says that's a conscious decision from us. But actually, Pollan argues maybe it's the other way around. Maybe the plants are choosing us. So maybe it makes sense to think of agriculture as the grasses choosing a way that they can dominate us to grow around trees. So is there a way of, this is sort of reinforcing that idea that we're being formed while being forming. And so I think this idea of nature sometimes chooses us. We don't necessarily look at it that way. We look at humans as the ones in control. Maybe we're not. This is a particularly sort of influential book for me personally, it's sort of The Affluent Society by Marshall Salins. And in it, he writes about this notion, and I love the term, that we've equipped ourselves with bourgeois impulses for Paleolithic tools, and that we look at these sort of places and people as if they are poor and as if they do not have enough because they do not have the same material culture as ourselves. And actually, that's really, really disingenuous. And so how can we look at this place with a non-colonial or non-hegemonic way of looking, and how do we make sense of the way we live? So there's something about the way we read culture as well that is kind of really interesting, because it's, I don't know if I've done that. Because it's also sort of an assumption that we're all growing in the same civilized way, whatever that civilized way means. And so that trajectory that we've all had, I mean, what's fascinating for me about Abu Dhabi in particular is we went from a subsistence life to a post-AI life. No industrial life, no post-industrial life, to post-AI life. How do we make sense of that? Because nowhere else in the world has kind of done that. And so we can't bring those same sort of trajectories and those knowledges to us. We also assume that everything progresses at the same way at the same time. And so this idea that actually, no, it doesn't, that we are at different stages of growth, we're at different stages of development, and they were also not the same. So something about hyper-locality is also of interest to me. So we talk about UAE, you will get a certain feel for the desert, but actually UAE has mountains. There are people who live in the mountains, people that are ocean dwellers that aren't nomadic. Sharjah is one of the oldest cities in this region. And as a city, you behave differently. Your relationship with language, your relationships with libraries, your relationship with architecture changes. So I think this sort of generalization that we do is slightly problematic, in that we need to think about our assumptions of that we're not all in the same place and the same trajectory at the same time. So how do we use that to think about what we're going to do? So it's interesting with the Guggenheim conversation. The way the Guggenheim, and if you look at the Guggenheim in New York, it's very different to Peggy Guggenheim in Venice. And so what do those contexts allow us to maybe make a better sense of the world? Because we're not always after an answer. I think we're after questions, we're after sense-making, and that sense-making changes. I think there's also this assumption that we're modern, that we're going to modernize. And I think I see this tension playing out in the UAE quite a bit as we desperately try and become modern. And what I love about Bruno Latour is we're never modern. These superstitions sit with us no matter who you are. Some of the most scientific scientists I've sat with, the physicists out there, that belief system is still grounded from 3,000, 4,000 years ago. So how do we actually think of ourselves in different ways? I think the other really interesting thing for me is when we look at the rhythm of everyday life, going back to that call for prayer. 9 to 5 is a construct of the Industrial Revolution. If you've not had industries, what does 9 to 5 actually mean for us? We're still clocking in, clocking out. Why are we doing that? Is there a way of rethinking this? Number 5, there's a tacit assumption that the finance world is the world we live in, and I know Faisal's going to ask these questions about why do we always have to talk about money? Because there are other economies that take place, and I know money matters, but actually there are other things that are actually far more important. And so when we talk about things like the gift economy, and for those that you read Lewis Hyde, gift, how do you put a price on gift? How do you put a value, a monetary value on gift? And Hyde would argue that that talent as a gift cannot be bought and sold, it can only be used. It can only be shared. And so there are some things in the gift economy, and I think there's a whole colonial stuff around pipes and tobacco, etc., in Native America versus the way the Europeans take that gift and the way it's used. So how do we put other economic models onto the way that we work? What is the importance of an idea economy, a cultural economy that's not financial, but actually super important about the way we behave to each other and the way we make a living on this planet? So I think the plea is, can we start thinking of other models of economy other than financial? Idea number 6 is around placemaking as an emergent property. And I think I always have this argument with Hanan around placemaking is emergent. You don't just make place. Place has to emerge from the activities that happen in it. And so things of timing are really important. It's a destination. It's not a destination. It is a process. Alserkal, how long did it take to become Alserkal? And arguably, it's still becoming Alserkal because every time it's different. I've only been here a few years, but the first few years I went to Alserkal and where it is now, there's a development going on. So we're always becoming, so placemaking is an emergent property and it's always in the process of becoming. I think there's one other point around this notion of emergence is time and durationality. Joseph Beuys said that culture needs a long runway, and I think we rarely give culture and that runway time. We do not give it time to sink in, we do not give it time to develop, and we change too quickly. And so when do we put in these moments of time? And I particularly like this from the Long Now Foundation, who really think of a long, long timeline. And so how do we actually think at these multiple levels that things take place at very, very different times? Some things can change really quickly, and they should. But other things, actually, we need to take our time for them to be absorbed, for us to make sense of them, and for them to make sense of us. And so how do we put this different notion of a durationality and a quality of timing? I think people talked about going slow, but how do we actually make a better sense of quality of slowness? And number 7, and this does lead to the question about placemaking cities. And I think once again, this is the work that's being done by MIT Media Lab, and it's trying to make sense of how people move in cities, and very rarely do we talk about anything other than the built form in cities. We don't talk about how people live. And I would argue that some of the scales of master planning that we're doing are inhumane, and that we need to go back to smaller things. And we can talk about streets. Neighborhoods, I would argue, are a better scale of interrogation. It's not a city that is creative, it's literally streets. And so how do we think at that level, whereas governments are thinking at these massive levels that become inhumane? And then once again, just repeating that point, that we're not all on the same trajectory. So a lot of smart cities work that's been happening, how does that translate to here? Well, we did not go through this path. We've jumped a lot of this. So how do we make sense of that in this way that we want to live? And then really the last point is, and this is Sir Francis Bacon, who arguably has a lot to answer for the way the scientific method has really removed wonder from our lives. And so he saw wonder as a really problematic thing, and he said the role of science was to begin in wonder and end in insight, because wonder was a problem. And I'm going to argue that as artists and designers that we ought to think the other way around. We ought to take insights and build in wonder. So I'll stop there.
Okay, Vilma, do you want to sit or would you like the podium? Okay, it's up to you. Okay.
I think it's this one. Yeah. All right. We cannot shorten my presentation. I will occupy the time that belongs, hopefully, to us. Well, good afternoon, and first of all, thank you, Maya, for your cognitive generosity and always interpersonal reciprocity in bringing all of us here together. You know, Pradeep gave an incredible opening. I think you talk about placemaking. I always also ask about place breaking. And someone who has studied place, I'm not going to attempt to describe it. There were many scholars who did that for us. But I guess Doreen Massey would be the one scholar who always said the kind of one dimension I would like to highlight is resist this temptation of drawing a line around place. And I think this is what I would like to attempt to do here this afternoon. And this is why I chose a work by Sorab, who was exhibited at Ishara Foundation on Alserkal Avenue back in 2021. And I love this work because what interests me when it comes to place is the flows, the metabolism of place, the in-between, the invisible, the process, the becoming, like you mentioned earlier, Pradeep. And really for me, that from that lens is that I look at Alserkal, or we built Alserkal from the very beginning. And perhaps that's why it's grounded in the plurality that it is. When we began, the West didn't know what to do with us. We didn't tick any of the boxes. Many times we were questioned. I mean, how can you be a neighborhood and occupy these different roles and be an art producer and then have your own foundation where artistic production and commitment to research can live, and then also launch Alserkal Advisory at a later stage. And we all commended Salwa for her role in the region here, and she was one of the first people that no one really understood us, who invited me to have a conversation and understand how is Alserkal becoming, and I'll never forget that. It gave us confidence at the very beginning. And so when Maya called me to participate here just a day before Alserkal Art Week, her prompt to me was grounded in our colleagues Mail Dabaga's work of theorizing up. And how does Alserkal respond to that? And I was thinking about this, and I was struggling with that, because theorizing up means there is theorizing down, and it implies a sort of hierarchy that I couldn't see how Alserkal would fit in that, because we are grounded in this rhizomatic thinking and rhizomatic doing and rhizomatic networks. And perhaps that's what brought me back to the theory of rhizome and this formulation by Deleuze and Guattari in 1,000 Plateaus, Capitalism and Schizophrenia, probably a good title for the world today. But this rhizome, which has no beginning or end, and it's always in the middle between things, interbeing, intermezzo. For me, resonated very well in terms of the kind of plurality Alserkal occupies as an institution. And I know we were section under place, but again, I think the attempt here is to make these connections and connect these binaries. If we viewed ourselves as a rhizome, as a whole, where no point is more important than the other. And it's all interconnected. There is no beginning or end, and it has multiple entry and exit points, and all these nodes are intertwined and interconnected. And so it's grounded in 6 principles, and since I have only 10 minutes, I'm not going to elaborate on all of them. Some of them are for a reference here, but perhaps I would highlight 2. So heterogeneity is an important one because it favors process over schema. And that's really important for us at Alserkal, the process of doing, of thinking. I always say we're not synonymous with the built environment. And perhaps the second one would be decalcomania, in a way that it's a continuous negotiation with the context, and you live in this form of experimentation. And so that brings me back to Abdulmalik Simon's work, who is one of my favorite urban scholars. He has written a lot about cities in the global south, and he compared the city to not a final act of a theater, but an infinite rehearsal. And for me, everything we do at Alserkal is a rehearsal. We rehearse time and time again. And any attempt in programming is an attempt to create a home for the publics we serve. And even if the attempt fails, it's the attempt that matters. So dislocating some of those measures of success when we think of institutions that are embedded in place. And so I wanted to give a few, outline a few attempts that would connect to this being of an existing as a rhizome, that plurality of a rhizome. And what does that consist of? And some attempts are ours and some are not. And I think that, again, is so important. That you are not the one who owns the place or the institution, and you're not the one only doing the work. That collectivism, it's connected throughout as a whole. So one of them would be on this land exhibition in 2023 with genocide in Gaza taking place. We could not continue with our program in November as planned. We had to discard what was originally planned because, again, as a rhizome, you respond, you react, and you also act. And we felt that, so that was number one. We had to change the course because we knew where our audience is situated and that we are all in pain and resonating with all the events happening around us. And the first thing we did as part of our practices of care was checked up on institutions who are in our region. So we connected with the Palestinian Museum, with Amar Shamali, who's the director there, to say, how are you? How are you holding up at this time? And this is how this happened in 3 weeks, because they were working on an exhibition for a while with Brazil Art Foundation that connected the archives of the museum to the collection that was built by Brazil Art Foundation, housing artists who were in solidarity with Palestine. And that exhibition had to be canceled, and we said, let's bring it to Alserkal. And so this kind of came to life in less than 3 weeks. The other attempt I wanted to touch upon, I would say, is not ours, but some of you are connected and familiar very much with Hazem Harb's practice, and which is grounded in nomadism. And I mean, I met Hazem Harb maybe in 2012, the very beginning of Alserkal in a way, and he found us. He found the spaces within us. One aspect I always say about this region is that we are grounded in informality. And sometimes we have this temptation to formalize, because if it's not formal, that means it's not valid. And that's something we always challenge. That's something that this region challenges. And Hazem would get multiple studio spaces in which he actually lived. So in a way, he found spaces within us, and he sought for those spaces. And it would be very informal conversations, and he would take one studio and the next, and that was never formally, it was never formalized, but it made a huge contribution to this rhizome of Alserkal in a way. And this was his performative act in 2023 as part of our program. Another attempt I want to touch upon is our Public Art Commission, which was a series was curated in the last cycle by Zoe Whitley, who used to run Chisendale Gallery. And it was grounded in this walk with me curatorial premise, so this withness, which also very much connects to our values and thinking at Alserkal. And Abbas Akawan was now selected to represent Canada in the next Venice Biennial. And his practice is very much grounded in very conceptual way of thinking and research-informed practice. But for this particular work, he went back to the materials we had stored, because it used to be an old marble factory. And he reimagined these materials, almost like recycled the place, by creating this commission, which at the beginning nobody really understood. And I think one of the important premises for organizations is to commission public work that is very conceptual and not only loud and poppy or Instagrammable, because that's our responsibility. It's not arbitrary for institutions. And it's interesting because nobody understood it at the beginning, and now everyone is asking to extend it. Cats are drinking water from the fountain. Labor communities engaging with our publics are always sitting around it, and it became a very loved piece and brought the past of Alserkal back to its present. And the last one I wanted to just highlight was our commission across 3 continents. I thought that the art world has done, I mean, we theorized the climate crisis and the importance of it, but we are failing in realizing it through practice. I mean, all our exhibitions are shipped. We have full disregard in even attempting to audit the emissions through our work. And so I thought, why is it so hard? Because it really is. And where can we start? And this is how this idea actually came about. And we teamed up with Victoria Yards in Johannesburg and Kingston Creative Cultural District in Jamaica to, it was a global co-commission curated by Tyrone Bastian and inspired by Anna Singh's work, Feral Atlas, and so it became a Feral Commons thematic, but the intent was how can we actually audit the CO2 emissions. We collaborated with Urban Art Projects. We devised the tool to help you do that, where we don't do it in the aftermath, but we intentionally start the commissioning process by auditing the materials with artists, understanding what is the impact on the environment, and then changing those materials to actually think some of the commissions in an outcome became carbon negative. So many learnings we carried with us. I only chose one work that I wanted to show, which is in Johannesburg. Uxke River actually just crosses Victoria Yards Cultural District, and it became the very first wildlife ecoduct ever built in South Africa. And built from recycled bricks in the area that were more than 100 years old. And as an outcome, not only this engaged the community, but it allowed for more funding for this water initiative to actually clean the river, which is the most polluted river in Johannesburg. So it just really made us rethink how you commission public work and why. Because in some of these environments, you have to really justify the economics that goes into it to make sure that it's not only an aesthetic or something that ignites thinking, new forms of thinking, but in ways is also practical for community to accept and embrace it. And I guess as I close, I chose Daniel's work. This was an exhibition in 2018 in Contemporary Art Center in Vilnius, curated by a colleague, Neringa Bumbliena. And he's a Spanish artist based in Rio de Janeiro. And this was an installation connecting the forestry, the nature with the artificial layers. And he always is looking at that middle ground and dislocating these binaries, this kind of very Western structure and way of thinking. And that is really my invitation, actually, to stop wanting to define and draw those lines and box institutions and flatten, look at that kind of very like kind of flattened and non-hierarchical way of thinking and producing, and make it complicated, problematize it, because I think that is actually the fact that we try to make everything so structured and simplified is part of the problem. So I would say that would be my response to the prompt. Thank you.
Thank you so much for those really beautiful thoughts. And now for last and definitely not least, Bill Bragan, who is the Executive Artistic Director of the Arts Center at NYU Abu Dhabi. Okay. Up to you.
Wait, let's just go. I don't need my notes. No. Yeah. Okay. Cool. Oh, I've got my notes here. I don't even need to do that. So first, I just want to thank Maya for inviting me to do this. To Pradeep's point about things growing at different paces, I come from the performing arts, which is a much younger part of the ecosystem of the arts and culture scene in the UAE. And it's really so many of the people in this room from the visual arts and museum world who have been part of my sort of circular knowledge transfer, and I've learned so much from, including today. So Maya, thank you for including me here. This is not self-promotional, but there is a book there which is going to form the source of my talk. It was something we put together. I call it our 5th anniversary book. It goes up to our 7th season and came out in our 9th season. And it's a polyphonic sort of chorus of voices of many, many different people, scholars and academics and students and artists and journalists, sort of capturing for future archives, I think, thinking about Salwa and thinking about Manal's talks, just to kind of capture what we were thinking as we were developing the Arts Center 10 years ago. And so it was edited by Nadine Khalil, and most of the images you'll see are from Walid Shah, who's a photographer who's been documenting our work at the Arts Center. And it's really, I put it forward as a way to have a framework to think about sort of our role and our place within the context of the university and within the UAE as a whole. A human-sized aquarium filled with 12 tons of water sits in the middle of NYU Abu Dhabi's Central Plaza. When entering the campus from the Welcome Center, it's the first thing you see. Abutting the towering grove of palm trees at the center of the campus, with the university library in the background, the tank is surrounded by Bedouin tents, which disguise sophisticated controls that manage an elaborate pump system. Over the course of 5 hours, as the daylight fades and the sunset turns to full night, a series of performers enters the tank and perform everyday tasks. Reading the newspaper while sipping takeout coffee, mopping the floor and polishing the glass walls, practicing guitar, coiling a garden hose, selling fruit in the marketplace. Amid these gestures, the tank floods. The waters rush in or roll in slowly like the tides and recede. All the while, the performers continue their daily activities, ignorant or at least ignoring the fact that their environment is changing around them. The 11-foot-tall tank installed for Lars John's durational performance installation Holocene is strategically placed. It is equidistant between the experimental research side of NYU Abu Dhabi's campus to the west and the arts and humanities buildings on the east, in between the engineering and social science divisions. For the week of the installation in November 2016, this striking artwork couldn't be ignored by anyone crossing the campus. Is it a living aquatic sculpture? Is it theater? Is it dance? Yes. Designed to spark conversation about global warming and rising sea levels on a campus which sits on an island, in a city of islands, in a country whose very existence is based on adapting to extreme climate conditions, and where the relationship to water resources is fundamental, we presented Holocenes during Abu Dhabi Art, just down the road from the art fair, expanding the reach of the then burgeoning Saadiyat Cultural District. The response to Holocenes was incredible. It became a platform for conversations about the facts of climate change, the practice of social engaged art, and the wide-ranging implications of Abu Dhabi public policy around environmental readiness. We held forums around climate change, responses within the energy sector, and discussions about the impact of increasingly extreme climate conditions on the home countries of the many expats on campus. The tank's designer met with engineering students, while the costume designer discussed her experimentation with materials in theater design classes. Every night, young families on the campus came to watch the underwater performances in the tank instead of watching television before bedtime. Local filmmakers produced music videos repurposing images from the performance, and CNN covered the piece, bringing the discussion of rising water levels to an even larger public. When considering whether we should include a project in our season, an early rule of thumb was, is there anyone else in the country who would consider bringing such a project? No? Then the project needs us. Another was, does the work require multiple hyphens as a descriptor? Would it be rewarding for the curious audience member? If so, then I want to share it with the community. During this engagement, bold and unprecedented for the region, I recognized that my reasons for wanting to be a part of the grand experiment for NYU Abu Dhabi were being realized. I still remember a call in February 2014 about the search for an executive artistic director for the Art Center at NYU Abu Dhabi, as they planned to open the campus on Saadiyat Island, then under development as Abu Dhabi's new cultural district, which would include Louvre Abu Dhabi and the still upcoming Zayed National Museum and Guggenheim Abu Dhabi. I heard about the larger project, a liberal arts college and research university with an elite student body from over 120 different countries, forming a radical experiment in transnational learning. As then Provost, now Vice Chancellor Fabio Piano posed at my interview a few months later, what's the point of building if not for transformation? How do you build a society that's global in focus? What impact can a single university have on a nation? I was intrigued. Up until that point, my career had always been based in New York City, a global capital, and much of my focus has been on the intersection between world-class artists and civic engagement. I was excited by the opportunity to bring my cosmopolitan outlook to a new context and to help shape the rapidly expanding creative and cultural center in Abu Dhabi as it became an epicenter of arts and culture in the Manassa region. One of the hallmarks of my career has been a devotion to presenting eclectic work to diverse audiences. I believe that one can present artistically sophisticated programming that simultaneously builds community, brings audiences of all ages, cultures, economic backgrounds, and experience levels together, and expands receptivity for the arts in general. As I proceeded with the detailed interview process, I met a broad range of NYU AD leadership, faculty like Salwa, staff, and government partners. I also met key members of the UAE arts community, including the Abu Dhabi Music and Art Foundation, the Art Dubai Fair, and The Fridge, an independent music venue located at Dubai's Alserkal Avenue. Trying to uncover the multiple visions and needs for a new art center required discussions leading to a more complex understanding of the promise, potential, and cultural dynamics involved. We discussed the myriad challenges, the young infrastructure and attitudes towards public art, and opportunities of the current UAE arts ecosystem, becoming a shapeshifter in a multicultural environment, forging intersections between the performing arts and scholarly research, and how to connect the university to the intellectual life of the city. All of these actors gave me an understanding of the larger artistic sphere within the UAE, the structural realities in which we'd be working, and the importance of looking outside the walls of the NYU AD campus for local and national collaborations. With each conversation, my vision broadened and deepened, and I realized that in order to reach its transformative capacity, the Art Center would need to go far beyond simply presenting dance, theater, and performance. More than just a showcase, it would become a cultural reference point. From its conception, the Art Center, like our sister program, the NYU AD Art Gallery, was intended to be a resource for the benefit of the entire public of the UAE. Fast forward a dozen years, and the Art Center succeeded in supporting the educational mission of the university, fostering research-driven practices and curricular integration, engaging with the local, regional, and global art communities, and putting the UAE on the map as a cultural player. Perhaps most importantly, I believe the Art Center has shown the impact of cross-disciplinary thinking that resists the separation between art and life and between art and academia. It has broken traditional barriers between performers and viewers, makers and scholars. It all began with a shared vision, one of panoramic engagement, which would encompass a 360-degree constellation of activities orbiting around the artists at the Art Center. These activities including presenting and developing new work, catalyzing conversations, and inspiring local creators through workshops and guest teaching opportunities by artists. In our vision, artistic practice is as much process as it is product, and it's this spirit of experimentation and iteration that I believe is one of the legacies of the Art Center. In our first ventures, when we opened before our indoor venues were functional, we presented events on the outdoor plaza. Here, we discovered how important the Art Center was in terms of creating a commons, a meeting place for an audience with extraordinarily diverse backgrounds and experiences. During these early days, we also tested other formats which have become hallmarks of our curatorial practice, such as artist welcome dinners, class visits, and workshops with musical artists. Often described as a laboratory for performance, the Black Box is a flexible layout adaptable to the changing needs of the artists. The Black Box is a place where we can incubate new creations, a versatile space in which we have commissioned and developed new works by visiting artists. We've commissioned or co-commissioned over 50 pieces now. It's a place where students and faculty co-produce new work. Early shows here enable us to figure out who our audience might be and how best to serve this extraordinarily diverse mix of experienced and first-time audiencers. The Red Theater, a striking proscenium theater with a beautiful balance between monumental scale and plush intimacy, is arguably the finest performing arts center within the UAE. When it opened, we were enabled to further expand the ambitions of our programming, trying to raise the bar for interdisciplinary performing arts in the country with programs that were locally embedded, yet simultaneously regional and global in reach. From its inception, the Art Center has collaborated closely with NYU Abu Dhabi's academic departments. The Blue Hall, our jewel box of a recital hall, is the locus of many of these collaborations, including faculty and student recitals, a contemporary Arab film and discussion series, and master classes by artists like Lang Lang and Angelique Kidjo. When the Art Center opened, a driving question was whether we can attract an audience to an island which was barely on the country's mental map. Just a few years earlier, Saadiyat Island was uninhabited with no bridge linking it to the rest of Abu Dhabi. In our 5th anniversary season, as the global pandemic of COVID ravaged the world, the question needed to change. We began to ask, what can an art center be when you can no longer gather an audience in a specific place and time? How can we ensure that we could keep pursuing our artistic, educational, and community missions when the doors to the venues were closed for an indefinite period? How could we reimagine our connectivity to our publics? During the pandemic, we made a rapid response to move the Art Center online, offered an artistic lifeline when people needed art the most. We looked at how the Art Center entered people's homes via Zoom and social media feeds, on theatrical telephone calls, and through 3D audio headphone pieces. In this way, our work moved from space to non-space, with the particularities of geography and place to the unconfined borderlessness of the internet. And ultimately, even now that we're back to fully in-person programs, we're still grappling with the fundamental question we began with. How can we most effectively make space for the arts in people's lives, not as a luxury, but as part of their everyday habits, and not as something to be ignored? How can we build a space for interdisciplinary and transcultural collaborations to complement and extend our in-person work? How can the arts create a shared history and a common culture in a place as transient and as much constant flux as the UAE? And finally, what role do the arts have to play in defining the UAE's rapidly changing identity to the rest of the world and defining the UAE's identity to ourselves? Thanks so much.
Okay. Stephanie had, don't worry, I know you will. Stephanie had to depart, but Mustafa still here. He could come back to the stage. And Terry and Ortina. We are going to be one chair short, so we can also sit on the floor.
I can sit on the...
Or stand or walk around.
I'll sit here.
Okay, we'll jump up and down. Let's all join in.
No, I'm not going to lecture. All right. Well, hi everyone. Good to see you again. I promise I'll make this very quick. When Maya asked me, is it working? Yeah. When Maya asked me to moderate the conversation about place, I actually, didn't sit down and speak with any of the presenters before. Till yesterday, I had a very brief conversation with Pradeep and with you, Bill, but I didn't talk to Vilma or talk to Terry or to Stephanie. And But I started to think about the questions that I wanted to ask you that I am constantly asking myself and asking the people that I work with when it comes to kind of what's our role as, cultural institutions. And, Mustafa touched on something that I already had, is that, when we're thinking about, cultural institutions, we need to think beyond, the fixed side and architecture of it. Instead, think about institutions as ecosystems of knowledge and dialogue and practice. And, when we think about 421, we're always, thinking about the idea that we prioritize relational practices over static collections. We're a non-collecting institution, and we really think beyond the exhibition and the works that are in exhibition. We think about the learning and the capability building opportunities. We think about the forums, the conversations, etc. But the question that always remains in my mind: how far do these ambitious ambitions extend really into the broader fabric of society? We remain a highly stratified society, and access to these cultural dialogues may remain limited to certain demographics. And in a society that's constantly growing with shifting demographics like the UAE, how far can we, champion accessibility and inclusion, especially in private small institutions with limited resources? It might seem weird to be talking about that here, but Alserkal is one, and 421 is another one, and many of the institutions that work here in the UAE, we do work with limited budgets and limited resources. But how can we continue to kind of push further and try to understand, are we actually reaching the audiences or not?
You can't exist without the publics, and it just goes back to what I presented about rhizomatic networks and rhizomatic thinking, because it's inclusive by default. You can only coexist as a whole together in that collective mindset, because you are in a way producing and you are reproducing, you are a producer and you are a product, all at the same time. For me, audiences, how we reach them, it's how you speak with them and not to them, and how you make space. How, if the audiences feel, the publics, the participants, the artists, the entire, these multiple networks within a network, if they feel that Alserkal is theirs, that's for me the measure of success. Because then we are doing this together. We are yours as much as we are ours. And that relationship is something that it makes me so happy when I hear people references throughout this morning. Alserkal was mentioned in multiple presentations because of the collaborations we had, not because we asked to be mentioned. And that relationship for me is what we always carry. These relationships that we have with the publics, and grounded in long-termism and gratitude. And as long as we resonate, we exist. If you don't have the audience, if you're not speaking with someone, you're irrelevant. And that's probably the biggest challenge for all of us, because we talk about slowing down, but the world is not slowing down. Barbara Glachevsky has written a lot about slowing down, and there's something she said: we archive history before it's finished today. This is the challenge we have. So how we as institutions respond to that? And so we constantly, and that's why we have to always evolve and readapt and remodel ourselves. But of course, it's always a challenge. But for us, we have to be very nimble and flexible and change with everything around us. Change is the only constant at Alserkal, actually.
So I'm a product of particularly free civic performing arts festivals, the Public Theater, Creative Free Shakespeare in Central Park Summer Stage, Lincoln Center, and in all of those, I think the question for me is what happens when you can remove the barrier of price and make the work available. So that was something that was very important. And our first 2 seasons at the Art Center, all of our tickets were free for everybody. And that allowed us to really connect with a lot of different audiences who were really just putting forward their time and their interest and curiosity and not putting forward their money. The other thing that's really important is whose work is represented on stage. What's on stage impacts what's in the audience. And what does it mean for there to be a performing arts center in a place that hadn't had this kind of model before? Early on in our pilot season, we led with a Kenyan electro disco group. It was really important that we weren't starting with symphonies and string quartets and traditional theater. We were starting with work that represented very important, vibrant communities. And then we had to think about access, physical access. At the time, as I mentioned, Saadiyat was new as a destination. There was no bus service here. So for example, we presented in our second season a Filipino disco night. And the Filipino community here largely doesn't have as much private transportation. So then we needed to really think about how can we set up bus shuttle service so the audience that we created the work for would be able to actually access us, and how could we build allies and ambassadors within the community, which we focused on the people who are working here on campus, people who are working in the food service and facilities and security divisions, people who are working on campus as nannies, so that they could go out to their own communities and really create a sense of shared ownership and shared belonging. And that, I think, has been something that we've continued to go forward. We now do charge for about half of our programs, but we intentionally keep them underpriced. We think intergenerationally, I think it's a long-term intergenerational strategy. I remember an article in the New York Times the week that I started here in December 2014 that was about the Guggenheim Abu Dhabi, which was going to open any day now, and they interviewed His Excellency Zaki Nusseibeh, and he talked about what does it mean in a place where the kids have always grown up and the Guggenheim Abu Dhabi has always been there, that it's not just about the importing of these institutions, but it's about using the resources and the ambitions that are here to really create kind of a long-term transformational approach.
I think to add another voice and another viewpoint in there. I mean, I'm always interested in this notion of audience, and it's relational. Yeah, so how does one maintain a relationship? And I think, you know, like all relationships, we need something in common that brings us together, but we need something different that keeps us coming back. And so how do we build this, I think Stephanie's not here, but she was talking about this, how do we live in this contradiction? That we want to go to a place regularly because it's familiar, but then we also want to be entertained by something that's different. And so how do we constantly, you know, just still forming the idea. When I think of the Louvre, Guggenheim, etc., these are large gestures. These are large tourism-driven gestures that we will go to twice, 3 times a year maybe. Where are the other places that we could go to every day? And so I think, how do we build this multi-level place that, you know, 421 to me is a community space. It's a space where we will go every single day, and there's always something that is familiar, but then there's always something new. Same with Alserkal, there's always something that attracts us. And from a relational perspective, those audiences are kind of, we need something new, but we also want something familiar. So how do we live in that strange space? I think the other thing I find very different from, say, Dubai, where audiences will turn up for the opening of an envelope. You know, it is very easy to get an audience.
Wait a second. I have something to add. It was not always like that. I mean, I still remember our very first program that we put together with Bufena Kazem before Cinema Kill days. 7 people showed up. And, you know, today I asked the team when we program, where is part of our new thinking creating programs that will attract only 7 people? Because you can't only do programs that attract now hundreds or thousands of people. We have to keep educating, pioneering, taking a step ahead, because that's how you grow your audiences over the years. And now we have Cinema Kiel, but it took years to get there. There was a pop-up, it was non-transactional, then we could start charging, and so it just took so long, and it keeps evolving. But thank you for highlighting Dubai's audience.
But it's also sort of understanding location, you know, and understanding here. You know, we always talk about Abu Dhabi in Beituti. We always stay at home. You know, people, there's much more activity happening in people's houses than there is outside. And so how do we respond to that? And I do think that notion, and I think, Bill, you do it particularly well here, you do have edgy presentations that are not everywhere. And I think one of the other observations for me in the Middle East is we're all mining the same area. And one of the dangers is that we're all doing the same thing, and you see the same sort of strategies and activities. And so how do we then create that next audience bubble? How do we create that next one?
I think also we say one audience, but actually it's just multiple diasporas and multiple audiences that we continue to serve. And that's something we're very mindful of.
With multiple abilities as well.
Yes. Absolutely, and it's multilingual. One of our successful programs that we put together was for one of the Ramadan programs where we had programming in 13 languages. And, you know, we did tours in Tagalog and tours in Farsi, because that is your audience here. It's audiences, communities, it's plural. It's not one imagined homogeneous audience, and I think that's something also we need to add to this conversation.
Yeah, and I think, you know, I intentionally use the word publics actually in my talk for the same reason, and I think that the thing that is special about here is because of the heterogeneity, right? There is no one answer. I think that many of us are asking the same questions. We're asking the questions about how do we find a home in a place that is so dynamic and so changing, where people come from many different places? How do we imagine different futures? How do we preserve very distinct personal histories and cultural histories and also look towards the future? So the questions are often in common, but there's so many different answers and so many different possible answers. So I think the other thing is a lot of the work that I think we're all doing here is just putting forward some offerings of some answers that some of the artists that we work with have proposed as a way to spark other epiphanies and other answers that haven't yet been thought yet. So I think that sense of offering, I think, is really important to me.
And also just to add to that, sticking to it, because I think quite often, I mean, The Alley is a project in Misa. And what was really interesting for me when the first Alley was there's a huge Sudanese diaspora that turned up. And they were really eager for a space where they could meet other Sudanese people. We have to stick with that. You know, we have to keep providing it. And so I think it's, yes, let's keep experimenting. I think there are multiple audiences, but I think, you know, that time, we do have to stick with this.
Okay. I just want to leave a question to everyone, actually. I just one, we don't need to answer it, but it always seems that when we're having conversations about the UAE and the cultural scene in the UAE that, you know, there's a specific destination that we need to arrive to. You know, that it always feels like, to me at least, that there's somewhere that we need to arrive to, like when we're explaining what we're doing, that we're expected to arrive at a specific destination. I don't know what that destination is. I don't think anyone knows that what destination is, but it just always has that feeling. If anyone knows where is that utopia, where is that utopia, maybe they can actually just answer that question.
Thank you all very much. This is so painful because I love everybody and I want us all to talk more, but we also need to eat. We are going to move to Leslie Gray is going to do a wrap up.
And then I just want to mention now as we're getting settled, we were meant to start lunch at 1, and so my hope is that after this we'll have a quick lunch and try to make up some time in order to see the artists and exhibition on campus and to move to the Public Art Biennial on schedule. I think it'll be fine. Welcome, Leslie. Thank you.
Hi, everyone. Thank you for sticking around. I have the incredible task of trying to wrap up 2 days of really interesting, engaging conversations, knowing that you're all hungry and probably need a bathroom break. I'll try to keep this as quick as possible, and we can continue to chat throughout the rest of our day today and onward as we continue the tour. So my name is Leslie Gray. I'm not with an institution, so I want to just explain myself a little bit. I've lived in the region for 17 years. 8 years I was in Qatar, and I was the product of 2 institutions there, working with VCU Qatar, School of the Arts, and also as a student at UCL Qatar, where I did my master's in museum and gallery practice. So I have kind of come out of a bit of the ecosystem that you saw yesterday. Then I moved to Dubai. I've been here for 9 years, and I'm working as a cultural consultant. So not for an institution, but with an overview of how institutions work, working to support them through different projects, as a curator and as a principal with the company that I work with. So that's my very quick kind of introduction as to why I'm here. I've worked with a lot of the places that you've been to and hope to continue working with more in the future. And to wrap this up, I think there are 2 things that really stood out to me. And they're related to my background and my history in this region as well. The first is the conversation about reimagining institutions. So I've been here for 17 years, and we've been having this conversation as long as I've been here. And those of you in the audience who've been here for a long time, you know what I mean. We're always talking about them in class, in panel discussions amongst ourselves, and also talking about needing new models. We always need a new model. The Western models don't work. How are we going to rethink these models? Well, I think what struck me the most is that when Her Excellency Manal was speaking this morning, she really articulated what the new model is, and we're living in it. You're seeing it. So we don't need to, I think this goes back to what Faisal was just saying, the sense that we're always becoming something or working towards something. We're in it, and it's always becoming. It's always that kind of rehearsal that Vilma was talking about. It's always unfolding. We're always engaging with our audiences. We're always responding to our context. We're always rethinking archives and the way that we situate our history. We're always rethinking what an institution can do, what it should do. And then finally, I really want to highlight the conversation about authority. We spoke about that in Qatar. So for those of you who were not at that session, we talked a lot about institutional authority, what it means in the current social and political climate, what it means for us as museums, as academic institutions, what it means for us as curators, and how we need to think about our responsibility. So really not to have an answer for that, but it's something for us to really consider. What is our responsibility now that we have these platforms? And I think that we can see in this region, and as I said, I've come kind of out of the region more broadly, and with a larger view, that responsibility, I'm trying to go really fast, is to the audience and the context. So always coming back to that. And you've heard it from everyone who's spoken here today and who spoke in Qatar. The audience is the core, the community is the core. We heard it again from Her Excellency Manal speaking about museums, institutions being places for taking care of ourselves, taking care of each other. And I'll basically close it at that. I think that's the big message. That is what we are here to do. That's what we should use our authority for. And hopefully you're seeing it in action as you're here with us in the Gulf. Thank you.